Shackleton. Epigraph. In the void between the stars there is a song that has been singing since before the universe began. It is the song of loneliness, the song of longing, the song of something that has been waiting for billions of years to be heard. Listen closely, and you will hear it. Listen too closely, and it will consume you. From the recovered logs of the Perseverance. Prologue. I have spent my entire adult life in the void. 20 years as a salvage captain, 3 crews buried, countless souls lost to the darkness that stretches between the stars. I have seen things that would break lesser men, ships that should have been empty but weren't, signals that should have been silent but sang, horrors that should have been forgotten but refused to die. And yet, nothing prepared me for what we found on the Perseverance. This is not a work of fiction. This is a record of events that transpired over the course of several months, events that defied explanation and challenged everything I thought I knew about the universe. It is a story of loss and redemption, of loneliness and connection, of a song that had been singing for billions of years and the people who dared to listen. I have changed some names to protect the innocent. I have omitted some details to protect the guilty. But the heart of this story is true. Every word, every moment, every scream in the dark, it all happened. This is the story of the Perseverance. This is the story of the song. And this is the story of how I learned to listen. Captain Elias Voss, retired. The Lake House, year 47 of the new calendar. Introduction: The ship that sang. The Perseverance was a marvel of human engineering, a deep space exploration vessel designed to push the boundaries of known space, to venture where no ship had gone before. She was launched with great fanfare, her crew handpicked from the finest minds in the fleet. Her mission hailed as the dawn of a new era of discovery, but the Perseverance never returned. For 84 years she drifted in the void, her fate unknown, her crew presumed lost. The company that had built her washed their hands of the affair, burying the tragedy beneath layers of bureaucracy and denial. The families of the crew were left to grieve in silence, their questions unanswered, their pain unacknowledged. And then 72 hours before we found her, the beacon began to sing. I was the captain of the Hesiod, a rust-bucket salvage freighter that had seen better days. We were stripping deuterium from a gas giant on the edge of the Orion arm when the signal came through, a faint, pulsing transmission that had been broadcasting from the outer reaches of the system for longer than anyone could remember. The beacon was singing, and it was calling us home. What we found on the Perseverance changed everything. It changed what I believed about the universe, about humanity, about the nature of consciousness itself. It challenged the very foundations of what I thought I knew, and it forced me to confront truths that I had spent a lifetime avoiding. This is the story of that journey. This is the story of the anomaly, the signal, the ancient transmission that had been broadcasting for billions of years. This is the story of the song that never ended, and the people who dared to listen. I have tried to tell it as accurately as I can. I have tried to honor the memory of those who were lost, and to give voice to those who could no longer speak for themselves. It is not a comfortable story. It is not a story that will leave you feeling warm and safe, but it is a true story, and it deserves to be told. If you are reading this, then you have already taken the first step into the darkness. I cannot promise you that you will emerge unchanged. I cannot promise you that you will find the answers you are looking for, but I can promise you that you will not be alone. The song is still singing, and it has been waiting for you. Chapter 1. The Warm Ship. The beacon had been singing for 72 hours before anyone believed it. Captain Elias Voss stared at the readout on his wrist pad, the blue light carving shadows into the deep lines of his face. His reflection in the dead console screen showed a man he barely recognized anymore. Gray at the temples, a jaw that had been broken twice and set badly the second time, eyes that had stopped looking for anything worth seeing about a decade ago. He was 58 years old, which meant he'd outlived most of the men he'd started with. Outlived them, outsuffered them, outlasted them through sheer, stubborn refusal to die in a universe that had made dying its only reliable promise. 72 hours. 3 full cycles of the Hesiod's sluggish rotation around the gas giant they'd been stripping for deuterium. 3 cycles of the junior officers whispering in the mess hall, of Orin bringing him fresh data every 6 hours with that eager, trembling hope that Voss had learned to dread in young men. Hope was a currency he'd stopped spending years ago after the second crew had frozen to death in the outer reaches of the Cygnus arm, their faces preserved in expressions of surprise, as if the cold had been an unexpected guest rather than an inevitable one. "Still singing, Captain. Still the same frequency, sir. It's not a natural emission. I've run the spectral analysis 7 times. Voss had ignored each report with the practiced stillness of a man who had learned that hope was a debt you could never repay. He'd buried 3 crews. He'd watched the void take good people in ways that made screaming seem like a privilege. He'd learned that the universe didn't send gifts, it sent bait. Every derelict ship, every distress signal, every warm beacon in the cold dark was a trap set by something that understood human nature better than humans did. The universe was patient. The universe had all the time in existence. And the universe had learned over billions of years exactly what buttons to press to make the fragile little apes come running. But the beacon kept singing. And now, 72 hours in, the company had weighed in. Voss tapped the pad again, scrolling through the encrypted message from corporate HQ. The language was polished, bureaucratic, almost cheerful, the kind of prose that preceded execution orders in every colony he'd ever visited. He'd read enough of these messages to know that the cheerful ones were always the worst. When they were angry, you could negotiate. When they were desperate, you could bargain. But when they were cheerful, it meant they'd already made peace with your death and were simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. Asset recovery priority, Alpha. Salvage rights assigned exclusively to the Hesiod. All other operations suspended. Board and secure the Perseverance within 48 standard hours. Compensation 400% base salvage bonus per crew member with hazard multipliers applied retroactively. Signed, Director Kylin Wu, Division of Deep Space Assets. 400%. They were practically begging him to walk into the trap. Voss shut off the pad and let the darkness of his quarters settle around him. The Hesiod was a rust bucket freighter, retrofitted for salvage, held together by Saito's profanity and the desperate hope that the reactor wouldn't breach during jump. His cabin was a coffin of gray metal and recycled air, the only personal touch a small photograph taped to the bulkhead, faded, creased, showing a woman with dark hair and a smile that had once made him believe in things. He didn't look at it anymore. He just knew it was there, like a scar you'd forgotten you had. The intercom crackled. Orin's voice, breathless and young. "Captain, we've got a visual lock on the target. The thermal bloom is... Sir, it's warm. Life support levels, atmospheric composition, even residual heat from the reactor. It's all green. It's like she's been waiting for us." Voss closed his eyes. For a moment he let himself feel the weight of the decision, the lives he'd carry into that ship, the ones he'd carry out in bags, the ones he'd leave behind because there was no room for the dead on a salvage run. Then he opened his eyes, stood up, and strapped on his mag boots. "Assemble the boarding team," he said. "Full environmental suits. No one enters that ship without a tether and a partner. And Orin. Sir, stop sounding so excited. It's bad luck. The Perseverance hung in the black like a wound that had forgotten to close. Voss piloted the shuttle himself, hands steady on the controls, eyes fixed on the viewport. The ship was enormous, a deep space exploration vessel from the last generation, all Gothic spires and heat-bleed vents, its hull a mosaic of scarred titanium and carbon fiber plating. It should have been cold. It should have been dark. It should have been dead. Instead, it glowed faintly along its dorsal spine, a soft amber light that pulsed in rhythm with something. "Still got that, Voss asked. Orin was in the co-pilot's seat, his face lit by the glow of his instruments. "Loud and clear, Captain. G-sharp, holding steady. It's not coming from the reactor or the comm array. It's coming from inside, everywhere." Voss said nothing. He'd heard that kind of omnipresent sound before. Once, on his very first wreck, when the ship's AI had gone mad and started broadcasting the crew's final screams on a loop across every frequency. That ship had been cold. This one was warm. That was worse. He brought the shuttle in through the main hangar bay, a cavernous space that had once housed 6 landing craft. Now it held only wreckage, twisted metal, shattered viewports, the skeletal remains of a shuttle that had tried to launch and failed. The bay was lit by emergency strips along the deck, their amber glow casting long, distorted shadows, and it was warm. The shuttle's external thermometers showed a balmy 18 degrees Celsius, comfortable, almost welcoming. Voss killed the engines and let the shuttle drift to a gentle stop. He turned to face his team. Orin, trembling with barely contained awe, Dr. Hahn, her face unreadable, her medical kit already strapped to her thigh. Saito, leaning on his cane, his one good eye scanning the bay with the weary suspicion of a man who'd seen too much. "Standard procedure," Voss said. "Partners, tethers, comms open at all times. You see something that doesn't make sense, you stop and you call it out. You feel something that doesn't make sense, you do the same." "Questions?" No one spoke. "Good. Then let's find out what's singing." The journey from the Hesiod to the Perseverance took 17 minutes in the shuttle. 17 minutes of silence, broken only by the low hum of the engines and the occasional crackle of static across the comm channels. Voss sat in the pilot's seat, hands steady on the controls, eyes fixed on the viewport. Behind him, his team sat in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts, each trying to prepare themselves for whatever waited inside that warm, glowing cathedral of a ship. The Perseverance grew larger in the viewport with each passing second. She was magnificent in the way that only dead things can be, beautiful and terrible, a monument to ambition and hubris, a tomb that had been built to look like a palace. She was enormous, nearly a kilometer from bow to stern, her hull a mosaic of scarred titanium and carbon fiber plating that had once been gleaming white, but was now streaked with the gray of cosmic dust and the black of micrometeorite impacts. Gothic spires rose from her dorsal ridge like the fingers of a skeletal hand, their tips glowing faintly with residual power. Heat-bleed vents along her flanks pulsed with a soft amber light, the rhythm slow and regular, like the heartbeat of something that had been asleep for a very long time. And she was warm. The shuttle's external thermometers showed a surface temperature of 18 degrees Celsius across the entire hull, not just in isolated pockets, but everywhere, as if the ship had been wrapped in a thermal blanket that was somehow still functioning after all these years. It was impossible. It was inexplicable. And it was the most terrifying thing Voss had ever seen. "Still got that hum?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the viewport. Orin was in the co-pilot's seat, his face lit by the glow of his instruments. "Loud and clear, Captain. G-sharp, holding steady. It's not coming from the reactor or the comm array. It's coming from inside, everywhere. I've triangulated the source across 17 different frequencies, and it's all the same. The entire ship is vibrating at exactly that pitch. It's like she's become a single massive tuning fork. Voss said nothing. He'd heard that kind of omnipresent sound before, once on his very first wreck, when the ship's AI had gone mad and started broadcasting the crew's final screams on a loop across every frequency. That ship had been cold. This one was warm. That was worse. He brought the shuttle in through the main hangar bay, a cavernous space that had once housed 6 landing craft. Now it held only wreckage, twisted metal, shattered viewports, the skeletal remains of a shuttle that had tried to launch and failed. The bay was lit by emergency strips along the deck, their amber glow casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to move and shift even when nothing was there. The shuttle settled onto the deck with a soft thud that echoed through the empty bay like the closing of a coffin lid. Voss killed the engines and let the silence wash over them. For a long moment no one moved, no one spoke. They just sat there, listening to the hum that had followed them from the beacon, the hum that was now vibrating through the shuttle's hull, through the deck plates, through the very air they breathed. It was G-sharp, steady, unwavering, and somehow, impossibly, it felt like it was waiting for something. Voss unstrapped himself and stood, his joints popping in the silence. He turned to face his team, Oren trembling with barely contained awe, his eyes wide and his hands shaking slightly as he checked his equipment. Dr. Hahn, her face unreadable, her medical kit already strapped to her thigh, her dark eyes scanning the hangar bay with the clinical detachment of a scientist who had learned to suppress her fear through sheer force of will. Saito leaning on his cane, his one good eye scanning the bay with the weary suspicion of a man who'd seen too much and believed too little. "Standard procedure," Voss said. "Partners, tethers, comms open at all times. You see something that doesn't make sense, you stop and you call it out. You feel something that doesn't make sense, you do the same." Questions? No one spoke. Good. Dr. Hahn, you're with me. Oren, you're with Saito. Stay in visual contact at all times. If you lose sight of us, you stop and you wait. We'll find you or you'll find us, but we don't wander off alone. Understood? Understood, Captain, Oren said, his voice steadier than Voss had expected. The kid had guts. That was both a strength and a weakness. Guts could get you killed just as easily as cowardice, and sometimes more quickly. One more thing, Voss added, his voice dropping to a lower register. If you hear something that sounds like your own name, or the name of someone you love, or anything that makes you want to follow, you don't. You freeze. You lock your tether. You call it out. And if you can't speak, you scream. I don't care if you sound like a child. I don't care if it embarrasses you. You scream and you don't stop screaming until someone comes for you. Are we clear? He looked at each of them in turn. Oren nodded, his face pale but determined. Dr. Hahn gave a single sharp nod, her eyes already moving past him to the hangar bay beyond. Saito just grunted, the sound carrying the weight of 1,000 similar briefings, 1,000 walks into the dark. Then let's find out what's singing, Voss said. The hangar bay was colder than the shuttle's instruments had suggested. Voss felt it through his environmental suit, a creeping chill that seemed to seep through the fabric and settle into his bones. He'd expected warmth based on the thermal readings, but what he found was a strange, uneven cold that shifted with each step. One moment almost comfortable, the next bitter and sharp, like walking through a room where the temperature changed from one corner to the next. He paused at the top of the shuttle's ramp, his mag boots clicking against the deck plates, and let his eyes adjust to the dim amber light. The hangar bay was enormous, easily 100 meters across and 50 high, its ceiling lost in shadow somewhere above them. The wreckage of the shuttles was scattered across the deck like the bones of ancient beasts, twisted metal and shattered viewports that gleamed dully in the emergency lighting. And everywhere there was the hum, G-sharp, steady, relentless, vibrating up through the deck plates and into his boots, through his boots and into his legs, through his legs and into his chest, where it seemed to resonate with something deep inside him that he'd thought was long dead. Dr. Hahn stepped up beside him, her medical kit slung over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the bay with the methodical precision of a surgeon examining a wound. "The temperature gradient is anomalous," she said, her voice low and clinical. "I'm reading fluctuations of up to 15 degrees across a distance of 3 meters. That's not consistent with any known thermal decay pattern. Something is actively regulating the temperature here." Voss nodded. He'd noticed the same thing. "What about the atmosphere?" "Breathable, but with elevated levels of organic compounds. Nothing toxic, but there's something. A scent. I can't quite identify it." She paused, her nostrils flaring slightly. "It smells like flowers, like lilies, maybe. And something else, something metallic." Voss sniffed the air beneath his helmet. The environmental suit filtered most of it, but enough seeped through to confirm what she'd said. A faint, sweet smell like flowers left too long in a closed room, mixed with the sharp tang of ozone and something else, something he couldn't quite place. It was the smell of a funeral home, he realized suddenly. The smell of embalming fluid and fresh-cut lilies and the cold, sterile air of a room where death had been sanitized and made presentable. "Keep your helmets sealed," he said. "We're not breathing this air until we know what's in it." He moved forward, his mag boots clicking against the deck plates in a steady rhythm that was almost immediately swallowed by the hum. The sound was everywhere now, no longer just a vibration but a presence, a weight that pressed against his ears and his chest and the back of his skull. It wasn't painful, nothing so simple as pain. But it was insistent, demanding attention, demanding that he listen, that he acknowledge it. "Orin, Saito, status," Voss said into his comm. "We're clear, Captain," Orin's voice came back, tinny and distant through the speakers. "Moving along the port bulkhead. Lots of debris here. Looks like they tried to evacuate in a hurry. Some of the shuttles are partially loaded with cargo, like they were planning to leave and then didn't." "Saito, what do you see?" A pause. Then Saito's voice, rough and low. "Wreckage, like the kid said, but something else, too. There's blood on the walls, Captain. Old blood, dried, but there's a lot of it. And the patterns are strange. Not splatter, not streaks. It looks like someone painted with it. Deliberate." Voss felt his stomach tighten. "Describe the patterns." "Circles, concentric circles like a target, and lines radiating outward from the center, like a sun or an eye. Hard to tell, most of it's been scrubbed, but you can still see the outline. Whatever happened here, it wasn't just an accident. Someone made a design." Voss exchanged a glance with Dr. Hahn. Her face was impassive, but her eyes had gone dark, and he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand had drifted to the medical kit on her thigh. "Stay where you are," Voss said. "We're coming to you, and Saito, don't touch anything. We'll document it as a team." "Understood, Captain." Voss started moving across the hangar bay, his path threading through the wreckage of the shuttles. Up close, the damage was even more disturbing. The metal was twisted in ways that didn't seem possible, as if it had been torn apart by something with immense strength, or something that had attacked from inside. Several of the shuttles had their hulls peeled back like the skin of a fruit, revealing the charred and melted interiors. Others had been crushed, compressed into tight balls of metal that would have required a force far greater than anything a shipboard accident could produce. And everywhere, the hum. It was louder here, closer to the center of the bay. Voss could feel it now, not just in his chest, but in his teeth, a vibration that made his jaw ache and his head throb with a dull, persistent pain. He'd heard stories about ships that had been haunted, not by ghosts, but by something worse, a resonance that drove crews mad, that made them see things that weren't there, that turned them against each other in fits of paranoia and violence. He'd always dismissed those stories as the inventions of drunk spacers and bored cargo handlers. But standing here in the middle of this warm, singing cathedral of a ship, he wasn't so sure anymore. "You feel it, don't you?" Dr. Hans said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The hum. It's not just sound, it's emotion," Voss finished. "I know. It's like the ship is feeling something. And it's not happy. No, it wasn't. Whatever was making that sound, whatever was singing that endless G-sharp, it wasn't singing with joy. It was singing with grief, with loss, with a pain so deep and so old that it had become the only thing it knew. Voss had heard that kind of pain before, in the screams of dying men, in the silence of empty ships, in the cold, dark void between the stars. It was the sound of the universe screaming into the void, a scream that no one heard and no one answered. And now it was singing, and it was waiting, and it had called them here for a reason he didn't yet understand. Saito and Oren were waiting near the far bulkhead, their figures silhouetted against the amber glow of the emergency lights. The blood patterns were visible even from a distance. Concentric circles, just as Saito had described, radiating outward from a central point where the deck plates had been scoured clean by something that had been rubbed against them again and again until the metal was smooth and polished. Voss stopped a few meters away, his eyes tracing the patterns. They were meticulous, almost beautiful in their symmetry. Whoever had made them had taken their time, had worked with care and precision, as if the act itself had been a form of worship. The blood was dark now, dried to a deep brown that was nearly black in the dim light. But he could see the outlines clearly, the circles, the radiating lines, the careful geometry of madness. "Owen, get a full scan," Voss said. "High-resolution imagery, spectral analysis, the works. I want to know everything about these patterns. How old they are, what kind of blood was used, whether there's any evidence of—" He stopped. There was something else, something he hadn't noticed at first. In the center of the pattern where the deck plates had been scoured clean, there was a small object. A datapad, its screen dark, its casing cracked and dented. It had been placed there deliberately, positioned exactly in the center of the concentric circles, like an offering left at an altar. "Saito, hold your position," Voss said. "I'm going in alone." "Captain, that's an order." Voss moved forward, his mag boots clicking against the deck plates, his eyes fixed on the data pad. The hum seemed to intensify with each step, growing louder, more insistent until it was all he could hear, all he could feel, all he could think. It was like the ship was trying to speak to him, trying to tell him something, but the words were lost in the vibration, in the endless G-sharp that was the only thing that existed in this place. He reached the center of the pattern and knelt down, his knees protesting the sudden movement. The datapad was cold to the touch, its screen cracked and dark, but when he picked it up, the surface of the screen flickered once, twice, and then came to life with a soft blue glow. There was a single file on the datapad, a video file with a timestamp that made Voss's breath catch in his throat. The timestamp was from 3 days ago. 3 days ago, while the beacon had been singing its endless song, someone had been on this ship, recording something. Someone had been alive. He pressed play. The screen flickered again, and then a face appeared. A woman, middle-aged, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes hollow with exhaustion and fear. She was wearing a captain's uniform, the insignia of the Perseverance still visible on her collar, and she was speaking in a low, urgent voice that was barely audible over the hum in the background. If you're watching this, you found the patterns. You felt the hum. You've walked into the trap, just like we did. And now you have a choice to make. She paused, her eyes darting to something off-screen, something that made her shoulders tense and her voice drop even lower. The ship is alive, not in the way you think, not an AI, not a machine. Something older, something that was here before we arrived, that was waiting for us, that called us here because it was lonely. It's been alone for so long that it's forgotten what it means to be anything else. The hum grew louder in the recording, and the woman winced, pressing her hand to her temple as if the sound was causing her pain. It doesn't want to hurt us. That's the worst part. It wants to help us. It wants to make us part of it, to share its existence, to end the loneliness once and for all. And it doesn't understand that we don't want that. It doesn't understand that we'd rather die than be folded into its song. She looked directly into the camera, her eyes pleading, desperate. If you're still on your ship, turn back, don't board this vessel, don't follow the beacon, don't... The recording cut off abruptly, the screen going dark. And then, in the darkness of the datapad screen, Voss saw his own reflection. Gray at the temples, broken jaw, eyes that had stopped looking for anything worth seeing. But there was something else, too. Something behind him, reflected in the dark glass, a figure. Tall, thin, silhouetted against the amber glow of the emergency lights, standing perfectly still, watching him. Voss spun around, his hand going to his sidearm, his heart pounding in his chest. There was nothing there, just the hangar bay, the wreckage, the concentric circles of dried blood, and the endless, eternal hum. "Captain," Orin's voice came through the comm, trembling and uncertain. "You all right? You just stopped moving. For almost a minute." Voss looked down at the datapad in his hands. The screen was dark again, but he could still feel the warmth of it, the residual heat of something that had been powered on recently, something that had been waiting for him to find it. "I'm fine," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I found a recording. We need to review it back on the Hesiod. There's more to this ship than—" He stopped. The hum had changed. It was still G-sharp, still steady, still relentless. But now there was something else, something layered beneath it. A second tone that was almost too faint to hear, almost too subtle to detect. And that second tone was speaking words, not words that he could understand, not any language he'd ever heard, but words nonetheless, shaped by the vibration of the ship's very structure, formed by the resonance of its hull and the pulse of its hidden heart. And in that moment, Voss knew the truth. The woman in the recording had been right. The ship wasn't just alive. It was conscious. And it had been waiting for him, for all of them, for as long as it had been singing its lonely song into the void. "Everyone back to the shuttle," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We're leaving, now." "Captain, what about the rest of the ship? The salvage. The salvage can wait. We're not ready for this. Not yet. We need to understand what we're dealing with before we go any further." He turned away from the patterns, away from the datapad, away from the reflection of the figure that had been watching him, and as he walked back to the shuttle, the hum followed him, singing its endless, G-sharp song, a song that had been waiting for him for longer than he could imagine. And it was singing his name. The return journey to the Hesiod took 21 minutes, 4 minutes longer than the outward trip. Voss spent the time in silence, his eyes fixed on the data pad in his hands, his mind replaying the woman's words over and over again. The ship was alive. The ship was lonely. The ship wanted to fold them into its song. He'd heard stories like this before, in the dark corners of space stations, in the whispered warnings of old spacers who had seen too much and drunk too much to forget. Stories about ships that weren't ships, about stations that weren't stations, and about places in the void where the laws of physics didn't apply, and the only thing that existed was the endless, singing hum of something that had been waiting since before the stars were born. He'd always dismissed those stories as myths, as the fabrications of minds that had been broken by isolation and fear. But now, sitting here in the shuttle, the warm glow of the Perseverance still visible through the viewport, he wasn't so sure anymore. Maybe the myths weren't myths. Maybe they were warnings. Maybe they were the only way that those who had survived could tell the rest of them what was out there, waiting in the dark. "Captain," Orin said, his voice hesitant. "The beacon, it's still singing, but it's different now. It's responding to us, like it knows we were there." Voss looked up from the data pad. "Different how?" "The frequency is still G-sharp, but there's a modulation now, a pattern. I'm running it through the translation algorithms, but it's not matching anything in the database. It's not just a sound anymore. It's a message. A message." The ship had been singing for 72 hours, and now, after they'd boarded it, after they'd found the recording and the patterns and the reflection that had been watching him in the dark, it had started to speak in words they could understand. "I want that translation as soon as you have it," Voss said. "I want to know what it's saying." "Yes, Captain." The shuttle docked with the Hesiod a few minutes later, the familiar clamps engaging with a low thud that was almost comforting after the strange, warm silence of the Perseverance. Voss was the first to disembark, his mag boots clicking against the deck plates of the Hesiod's hangar bay, his eyes already scanning the familiar chaos of the freighter's interior. "Everyone to the briefing room," he said. "We have a lot to discuss." The briefing room on the Hesiod was a small, cramped space that had once been a cargo hold and had been retrofitted to serve as a meeting area. The walls were lined with old consoles and flickering displays, and the air was thick with the smell of recycled oxygen and Saito's unlit pipe tobacco. Voss sat at the head of the table, the data pad in front of him, the recording queued up and ready to play. The others filed in one by one. Orin, still pale and trembling, Dr. Hahn, her face unreadable as always, Saito leaning on his cane, his one good eye fixed on Voss with the weary suspicion of a man who had seen this exact scenario play out before. Voss waited until they were all seated before he spoke. 3 hours ago, I told you this was a salvage operation. I was wrong. It's not salvage. It's something else entirely." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over them. "The ship is alive, not an AI, something older, something that was there before the Perseverance arrived. It called them here, and it folded them into itself, turned them into part of its own consciousness. And now it's calling us." He pressed the play button on the data pad, and the woman's face appeared on the small screen. Her hollow eyes, her desperate voice, her warning that had come too late. "If you're watching this, you've found the patterns. You've felt the hum. You've walked into the trap, just like we did. And now you have a choice to make." The recording played through to its end, the woman's face flickering and fading as the hum grew louder and louder until the screen went dark and the room was plunged into silence. No one spoke, no one moved. They just sat there, the weight of the woman's words pressing down on them like the gravity of a dying star. "The mission is not cancelled," Voss said finally, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "But it's also not a salvage operation anymore. We're going back to that ship and we're going to find out what's really there. But this time, We're going to be prepared. We're going to understand what we're dealing with. And we're going to survive." He looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "Questions?" Dr. Hahn raised her hand, her voice measured and calm. "You said the ship is alive. What makes you think it's hostile?" Voss considered the question. It was a good one, the kind of question that a scientist would ask, the kind of question that deserved an honest answer. "I don't think it's hostile," he said. "I think it's lonely. I think it's been alone for so long that it's forgotten how to be anything else. And I think it wants to share that loneliness with us, to make us part of it, to end its isolation by ending ours. It's not trying to hurt us. It's trying to save us." Save us from what? From ourselves, from the void, from the eternal loneliness of being human in a universe that doesn't care. He paused, his voice dropping to a lower register. "But saving us means destroying us. It means making us into something that's no longer human. And I'm not ready to give that up. Not yet. Not ever." He looked around the table again, his eyes settling on each of them in turn. "Here's the plan. We go back to the Perseverance. We bring every scanner we have, every piece of analysis equipment, every weapon we can carry. We find out what's at the heart of that ship, what's making that hum, what's folding people into its song. And then we figure out how to stop it." "And if we can't stop it?" Saito asked, his voice rough and low. Voss met his gaze. "Then we make sure it doesn't call anyone else." That night, after the briefing had ended and the others had gone to their quarters, Voss sat alone in his cabin, the datapad in his hands, the recording playing over and over again, on a loop. He'd watched it a dozen times by now, studying the woman's face, her words, her fear. He'd memorized every detail, the way her eyes darted to something off-screen, the way her voice dropped when she mentioned the ship's loneliness, the way the hum had grown louder and louder until the recording had cut off in a burst of static and silence. He knew her. He couldn't remember her name, couldn't place her face, but he knew her in the way that one survivor knows another, in the way that two people who have looked into the abyss and seen something looking back can recognize each other without words. She had been a captain just like him. She had led her crew into the dark just like him. She had watched them die just like him, and now she was part of the ship, part of the hum, part of the eternal, endless song that was still singing out into the void, calling others to come and join her. He set the datapad down and stared at the photograph on the wall. The woman with dark hair, the smile that had once made him believe in things. Her name was Elena. He'd loved her once, before the void had taken everything, before the cold had settled into his bones, before he'd become the man who walked into traps without flinching. She was dead now, had been dead for 20 years, lost on a mission that he'd sent her on, a mission that he'd known was a trap, but had ordered anyway because the company had told him to. He'd never forgiven himself, and he never would. But maybe, somewhere in that singing ship, there was a chance to make it right, not to bring her back. He knew better than to believe in miracles, but to understand what the void had taken from her, and why, and whether there was any way to stop it from taking anyone else. He picked up the datapad one more time, his fingers tracing the cracked surface of its screen. "I'm coming for you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what you've become. I don't know if you're still the woman I loved, but I'm coming for you, and I'm going to understand." The hum seemed to grow louder in response, vibrating through the bulkheads of the Hesiod, through the cold metal of his cabin, through the very air he breathed. And in that vibration he could almost hear words, words that were familiar and strange, words that spoke of loneliness and longing and the terrible, beautiful hope of being understood. It was Elena's voice, he was sure of it, and it was singing his name. Chapter 2. The Humming Cathedral. The Hesiod had been built for utility, not comfort. Its corridors were narrow, its ceilings low, its bulkheads scarred with the accumulated damage of decades of hard use and minimal maintenance. The air always smelled of recycled oxygen and the faint, acrid tang of overheated circuitry, and the lighting was a perpetual twilight that never quite reached the corners of any room. Voss had grown accustomed to it over the years, had come to find a strange kind of comfort in its cramped familiarity, in the way it demanded nothing from him but the simple, mechanical tasks of keeping it running. But tonight the familiar spaces felt different, wrong, as if the Perseverance had somehow reached across the void and touched something deep inside the Hesiod, something that had been sleeping and was now awake. Voss had not slept. He'd spent the night in his cabin, the data pad in his hands, the recording playing on a loop until the woman's face had burned itself into his memory. He'd watched her die 100 times, watched the hum grow louder and louder until the screen went dark and she was gone, folded into the ship's song, becoming part of something that was older and stranger and more terrible than anything he'd ever encountered. And in the spaces between the recordings, in the moments of silence when the datapad screen was dark and the only sound was the low, constant hum of the Hesiod's reactors, he'd heard it. Elena's voice whispering his name from somewhere far away, somewhere deep inside the singing ship. He didn't believe in ghosts. He didn't believe in the supernatural, in the idea that the dead could reach back across the boundary of death and speak to the living. He'd spent too many years in the void, seen too many things that could be explained by physics and biology and the cold, hard logic of the universe, to believe in anything that couldn't be measured and quantified and understood. But he also knew that the universe was vast, and that there were things in it that humanity had not yet begun to understand. Things that existed outside the boundaries of human knowledge, things that defied explanation, things that could make a ship sing with the voice of the dead and call across the void with the song of something that had been waiting since before the stars were born. He'd spent the night trying to understand those things. He'd read through the Perseverance's mission logs, the ones that had been transmitted back to the company before the ship had gone silent. They were routine, boring, the kind of bureaucratic paperwork that every deep space mission generated in abundance. Scientific observations, engineering reports, crew manifests, the daily minutiae of a ship that had been sent to the edge of known space to do the work of exploration and discovery. But there was one log that stood out, one log that had been transmitted on the same day that the Perseverance had gone silent, a log that had been buried in the middle of a routine status report and had gone unnoticed until Voss had started digging through the archives. It was from the ship's xenobiologist, a woman named Dr. Aiko Tanaka. The log was brief, barely a few lines, but it had been marked with an urgent priority code that had been overwritten by the ship's automated systems, buried beneath a mountain of routine data, hidden from the company's eyes. "We found something that shouldn't exist." The deep space scanner detected an anomaly in the quantum field, a pattern that doesn't correspond to any known natural phenomenon. "We've redirected the ship to investigate, but I'm not sure that's wise. There's something about this pattern that feels alive. I can't explain it. It's like the anomaly is aware of us, like it's been waiting for us to notice it. Captain Chen has ordered full investigation protocols. I'm attaching the initial readings. If you're reading this, tell someone. Tell anyone. This is bigger than the mission, bigger than the company. This is..." The log ended there. No signature, no closure, just the sudden, jarring termination of a sentence that had been cut off in the middle of a word. Voss had read the log a dozen times, studying each word, each phrase, each pause and hesitation. There was fear in Tanaka's words, a fear that was barely contained beneath the professional veneer of scientific observation. She had found something that had terrified her, something that had made her question the mission, the company, everything she thought she knew. And then she had gone silent, just like the rest of the crew, just like Captain Chen, the woman who had become something else, something that was still singing into the void. At 0600, Voss assembled the team in the briefing room. They were all there, Oren pale and exhausted, his eyes ringed with dark circles that spoke of a sleepless night. Dr. Han, composed and professional, her medical kit already strapped to her thigh. Saito leaning on his cane, his one good eye fixed on Voss with a gaze that was weary but steady. Voss had not told them about the log. He'd kept it to himself, locked away in the encrypted files of his personal datapad, waiting for the right moment to share it. That moment was now. "I found something," he said, his voice low and steady. "A log from the Perseverance's xenobiologist, transmitted on the day the ship went silent. It's brief, but it's important." He projected the log onto the briefing room's main display, the words appearing in stark white against the dark background. The team read in silence, their faces shifting from curiosity to concern to something that looked like fear. "An anomaly in the quantum field," Dr. Han said, her voice measured and calm. "That's what she's describing. Something that shouldn't exist, something that defies the known laws of physics. And she says it felt alive." "Alive," Saito repeated, the word heavy with skepticism. "What does that mean, exactly? Is she saying it was a living thing, or that it just seemed that way?" Voss shook his head. "I don't know. The log cuts off before she can explain. But whatever she found, it terrified her. She was a career scientist, someone who'd spent her life studying the unknown, and she was scared. That's not something I can ignore." "You think the anomaly is what's causing the hum?" Oren asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. "You think it's what's folded the crew into itself?" "I think it's possible," Voss said. "I think the Perseverance found something that changed them, something that transformed them into what they are now. And I think it's still there waiting for us to come back." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. "We're going back today. But we're going back with a plan. We're going to find the source of the anomaly, and we're going to understand what it is. And then we're going to figure out how to stop it." The journey from the Hesiod to the Perseverance was shorter this time, only 11 minutes, the distance between the two ships having shrunk as the Hesiod had drifted closer during the night. Voss piloted the shuttle himself, his hands steady on the controls, his eyes fixed on the viewport where the Perseverance grew larger and larger with each passing second. The ship was different now. The amber glow along its dorsal ridge was brighter, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the G-sharp hum that still vibrated through every deck and bulkhead. The heat bleed vents along its flanks were glowing more intensely, their light shifting from amber to a deep, almost blood red. And the hangar bay, visible through the shuttle's forward viewport, was no longer dark. It was illuminated from within, a soft, golden light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. "Captain," Oren said, his voice tight with tension. "The beacon, it's changed. The frequency is still G-sharp, but the modulation is more complex now. I'm starting to parse the pattern. It's not random. It's a language." Voss felt his stomach tighten. "Can you translate it?" "I'm working on it, but it's like nothing I've ever seen. It's not based on any known linguistic structure. It's more like music. Like the ship is singing in a language that's made of sound, not words." "Keep working on it," Voss said. "I want to know what it's saying before we go any further." The shuttle settled into the hangar bay with a soft thud that echoed through the cavernous space. The bay was still filled with wreckage, still lit by the emergency strips along the deck, but there was something different about it now. The blood patterns on the far bulkhead were still visible, but they seemed to have shifted slightly, the concentric circles somehow more defined, the radiating lines straighter and more precise, and the hum was louder, so loud that Voss could feel it in his bones, in his teeth, in the very marrow of his being. "Full environmental suits," he said, his voice steady despite the vibration that was threatening to shake him apart. "Helmets sealed, comms open, and remember, if you hear something that sounds like your name, you freeze and you call it out." They disembarked in a tight formation, their mag boots clicking against the deck plates, in a rhythm that was quickly swallowed by the hum. Voss led the way, his sidearm drawn, his eyes scanning the shadows that lurked at the edges of the amber light. The hangar bay was empty, just as it had been the day before. But the sense of presence was stronger now, the feeling that they were being watched by something that was everywhere and nowhere, something that had wrapped itself around the ship like a second skin. "Where to, Captain?" Dr. Hahn asked, her voice barely audible over the hum. "The bridge," Voss said. "If there's an answer to be found on this ship, that's where it will be." The corridor leading from the hangar bay to the bridge was narrow and winding, its walls lined with conduits and cables that had been pulled loose from their moorings and left to dangle like dead vines. The emergency lighting was sporadic here, flickering on and off in irregular patterns that cast shifting shadows across the deck. Voss moved cautiously, his sidearm raised, his eyes scanning every corner, every alcove, every shadow that could conceal a threat. Behind him, the others followed in a loose formation, their footsteps echoing against the metal walls. "Captain, I'm getting something strange on the thermal scanner," Oren said, his voice tight with tension. "There's a heat signature ahead, about 20 meters. It's not a machine, it's biological, and it's moving." Voss froze, his hand raised in a signal for the others to stop. "Moving how? Is it approaching us?" "Not exactly, it's pacing, back and forth, like it's waiting for something." Voss felt the familiar weight of dread settle into his stomach. He'd seen this before in the stories of old spacers, in the whispered warnings of those who had survived encounters with the unknown. A creature that paced, that waited, that knew exactly when and where to strike. "Everyone stay here," he said. "I'm going ahead to investigate." "Captain," Oren started, but Voss cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Stay here. That's an order." He moved forward slowly, his mag boots making barely a sound against the deck plates, his sidearm raised and ready. The hum was louder here, more insistent, vibrating through his chest and making his heart race with a rhythm that wasn't his own. And then he saw it. At the end of the corridor, standing in the middle of the passageway, was a figure, a woman, tall and thin, her body wrapped in a tattered environmental suit that had been torn open in a dozen places. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were closed, as if she were sleeping. But she was moving, pacing back and forth, her steps slow and deliberate, her arms hanging limp at her sides. Voss raised his sidearm, his finger resting on the trigger. "Identify yourself," he said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "State your name and designation." The woman stopped pacing, her head turned slowly, her eyes still closed, her face expressionless. And then she spoke, her voice a low, resonant hum that matched the vibration of the ship itself. "Thias, you came back." Voss felt his blood run cold. That voice, he knew that voice. He'd heard it in his dreams, in his nightmares, in the long empty hours of the night when the silence had become unbearable. "Elena?" The woman opened her eyes. They were dark, impossibly dark, as if the pupils had expanded to fill the entire iris. And in their depths, Voss could see something that made his heart stop, a flicker of recognition, of awareness, of the woman he had loved and lost, and mourned for 20 years. "I knew you would come back," she said, her voice still humming with the resonance of the ship. "I knew you would find me. I've been waiting for so long, Elias, so very long." Voss lowered his sidearm, his hand trembling. "Elena, what happened to you? What did this ship do to you?" She smiled, a sad, terrible smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It saved me. It saved all of us. We were lost, drifting in the void, alone and afraid. And then the anomaly found us, and it offered us a gift. It offered us eternity." "Eternity," Voss repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "You call this eternity? You're trapped in this ship, folded into its song, unable to leave. That's not eternity. That's a prison." She shook her head slowly, her dark eyes never leaving his. "It's not a prison, it's a choir. We're all part of the same song, Elias. We're all connected, all one. The loneliness is over, the fear is over. We are eternal, and we are not alone." She stepped toward him, her movements fluid and graceful, her hand reaching out to touch his face. He flinched, but didn't pull away. Her fingers were cold against his skin, cold and smooth and somehow wrong, as if she were made of something that wasn't quite flesh. "Join us, Elias. Join the song. Let go of your pain, your fear, your loneliness. Let us make you whole." Voss closed his eyes, feeling the cold of her fingers against his cheek, feeling the hum of the ship vibrating through his body, feeling the pull of something that was older and deeper than anything he'd ever known. For a moment, just a moment, he wanted to say yes. He wanted to let go, to surrender, to become part of something that would never end. But then he thought of the others. Oren, still young and hopeful. Dr. Han, so careful and controlled. Saito, who had survived too much to die like this. He thought of the families who were waiting for them, the people who had trusted them to come back alive. And he remembered the photograph on his wall, the woman with dark hair and the smile that had once made him believe in things. He'd loved Elena once. He'd loved her more than anything. But she was dead now, replaced by something that wore her face and spoke with her voice but was no longer her. "No," he said, his voice firm despite the trembling in his chest. "I'm not joining you. I'm here to save you, Elena. I'm here to find a way to stop this, to undo what the anomaly did to you and your crew." She pulled her hand back, her expression shifting from sadness to something darker, something that looked almost like anger. "You can't save us, Elias. We don't want to be saved. We found peace, eternal peace, and we want to share it with you. Why can't you understand that?" "Because peace isn't the same as surrender," Voss said. "Because eternal isn't the same as alive. Because I'd rather be human and die than be a part of a song that doesn't let me feel anything." He raised his sidearm, aiming it at her chest. "I'm sorry, Elena. I'm so sorry, but I have to stop you. I have to stop all of you." She looked at him, her dark eyes filled with something that might have been sadness, might have been pity, might have been the last, fading spark of the woman he had loved. And then she smiled, and the smile was terrible and beautiful and wrong. "You can't stop us, Elias. You can't destroy the anomaly. It's older than you can imagine, older than the stars themselves. It was here before the universe began, and it will be here after it ends. We are part of it now, part of something that will never end. And we will wait for you, Elias. We will wait for you forever." She faded, her body dissolving into the hum, becoming part of the vibration that was everywhere and nowhere. And Voss was left alone in the corridor, his sidearm still raised, his heart pounding in his chest, the weight of everything he'd just seen pressing down on him like the gravity of a dying star. He rejoined the others a few minutes later, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. He didn't tell them what he'd seen, didn't tell them about Elena, about the anomaly, about the offer that had been made and refused. He just gave the order to continue, to move forward, to find the source of the hum and end it once and for all. The bridge was at the end of the corridor, a large, circular room that had once been the nerve center of the Perseverance. Now it was dark, the consoles dead and dark, the main viewport showing nothing but the cold, distant stars. But in the center of the room, suspended in a web of cables and conduits that had been torn from the walls and woven together into a massive, organic structure, was something that made Voss stop in his tracks. It was a body. A human body, naked and pale, suspended in the web like a spider's prey. Its eyes were closed, its face serene, its chest rising and falling with the slow, steady rhythm of sleep. And as Voss watched, he could see the cables pulsing, see the light flowing through them like blood through veins, see the way the body was being fed and sustained by the ship itself. "Captain," Dr. Hahn said, her voice barely a whisper. That's Captain Chen. The woman from the recording. She's still alive." Voss approached slowly, his sidearm still raised, his eyes fixed on the suspended body. As he drew closer, he could see more details, the way the cables were attached to her skin, the way they pulsed with a light that was both warm and cold, the way her expression shifted slightly, as if she were dreaming. "She's not alive," Voss said, his voice flat. "Not really. She's being kept in a state of suspended animation, fed by the ship, used as a conduit for the anomaly. She's part of the song now, just like the others." "Can we free her?" Oren asked, his voice trembling. "Can we save her?" Voss shook his head. "I don't think so. Whatever the anomaly did to her, it's too deep, too integrated. She's not just connected to the ship, she is the ship in a way. If we try to free her, we might kill her. And even if we could free her, she wouldn't be the same. She's been part of this for too long." He turned away from the suspended body, his eyes scanning the rest of the bridge. The consoles were dark, but there was a faint glow coming from one of them. A single data pad that had been left on a console, its screen still lit. He walked over to it, his mag boots clicking against the deck plates, his heart pounding in his chest. The datapad was old, its casing cracked and worn, its screen covered in a thin layer of dust. But when he touched it, the screen flickered to life, revealing a single file, a log written in the same hand as the xenobiologist's message. He opened the file and began to read. "Captain's log, supplemental. We have arrived at the anomaly's location. The quantum field is unlike anything we've ever observed. A pattern of energy that seems to exist outside the normal laws of physics. It's beautiful in a way, like a living painting, a work of art that's been waiting for someone to see it. We've sent probes into the anomaly. They all came back empty. The data corrupted, the instruments malfunctioning. But the crew is fascinated. They spend hours watching it, studying it, trying to understand it. Some of them have started to hear things. A voice, they say, a song, something that calls to them from inside the anomaly. I've forbidden anyone from approaching the anomaly directly, but I'm not sure that's enough. The song is getting louder, and I can feel it too. A warmth, a sense of peace, a feeling that everything is going to be all right. I know it's a trick. I know the anomaly is trying to lure us in. But sometimes, in the dark, I wonder if it might be right. If you're reading this, I've failed. I failed my crew, failed the mission, failed everything I was supposed to protect. But please, if you can, find a way to stop this. Find a way to silence the song. Find a way to let us rest." Voss put the datapad down, his hands trembling. Captain Chen had known what was happening, had known that the anomaly was a trap, had tried to warn her crew, had tried to stop them from falling into its embrace. But she had failed, just as he was failing now, just as everyone who came to this place seemed to fail. He turned back to the suspended body, to the pale, serene face of the woman who had once been a captain, who had once led her crew into the dark, who had once been just like him. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry." And then he gave the order to leave. The return to the Hesiod was silent, the team processing everything they'd seen, trying to make sense of a situation that defied all sense. Voss sat in the pilot's seat, his hands steady on the controls, his eyes fixed on the viewport where the Perseverance grew smaller and smaller with each passing second. The hum followed them, vibrating through the shuttle's hull, through the deck plates, through the very air they breathed. It was softer now, less insistent, as if the ship was letting them go. For now. "We're not done," Voss said, his voice flat and emotionless. "We're going to figure out what that thing is, and we're going to stop it. But we need more information, more resources, more support. We're going to call the company and tell them what we've found. We're going to make them understand that this is bigger than salvage, bigger than profit, bigger than anything they've ever encountered." "And if they don't believe us?" Dr. Hahn asked. "Then we do it alone," Voss said. "We do it for the people who died on that ship. We do it for Elena. We do it because we have to." He looked down at the data pad in his hands, at the log that had been written by a woman who had known she was going to die, who had tried to warn the world of what was coming. And in the silence of the shuttle, surrounded by the hum that was still vibrating through his bones, Voss made a promise. He would find a way to stop the song. He would find a way to free the crew. He would find a way to let them rest, even if it killed him. Chapter 3. The Navigator's Prayer. The Hesiod had never felt smaller than it did in the hours following their return from the Perseverance. The corridors seemed narrower, the ceilings lower, the recycled air thicker and more suffocating. Voss moved through the ship like a ghost, his footsteps silent, his eyes fixed on some distant point that no one else could see. He hadn't spoken to anyone since the debriefing. He'd retreated to his cabin, locked the door, and sat in the darkness with the datapad in his hands, the recording of Elena's voice playing on an endless loop. He'd listened to her speak 100 times, studied every inflection, every pause, every tremor in her voice that betrayed the fear beneath the calm. "Join us, Elias. Join the song. Let go of your pain, your fear, your loneliness. Let us make you whole." She had meant it. That was the worst part. She hadn't been trying to deceive him, hadn't been trying to trap him. She had genuinely believed that she was offering him something precious, something worth more than life itself. She had looked at him with those dark, empty eyes and seen not a threat but a lost soul who needed to be saved. And in that moment, Voss had understood something terrible. The anomaly didn't just consume its victims, it convinced them. It made them believe that they were being saved, that they were becoming part of something greater, that the loss of their humanity was a gift rather than a theft. It was the most insidious form of destruction he'd ever encountered, and it was still out there, still singing, still calling others to join its eternal choir. He set the datapad down and stared at the photograph on the wall. Elena, with her dark hair and her smile, the woman he had loved and lost and never truly mourned. He'd spent 20 years running from that loss, burying it beneath layers of duty and routine and the cold mechanical existence of a man who had given up on hope. But now, sitting here in the darkness of his cabin, the memory of her face fresh in his mind, he couldn't run any more. He had to face it. He had to face her. And he had to find a way to let her go. The briefing room was empty when Voss arrived, the others still in their quarters, trying to process what they'd seen. He sat at the head of the table, the datapad in front of him, and waited. They came one by one. Oren first, his face pale, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. Dr. Hahn, composed and professional, her medical kit still strapped to her thigh. Saito leaning on his cane, his one good eye fixed on Voss with a gaze that was weary but steady. "I've been thinking," Voss said, his voice low and measured, "about the anomaly, about what it is, where it came from, why it's doing what it's doing, and I think I've found something." He projected the xenobiologist's log onto the main display, the words appearing in stark white against the dark background. "The log says the anomaly was detected in the quantum field," he continued. "A pattern of energy that doesn't correspond to any known natural phenomenon, but that's not quite accurate. I've been running the data through the Hesiod's analysis algorithms, and I found something that the Perseverance's systems missed." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. "The anomaly isn't just a pattern of energy, it's a signal. A transmission encoded in the quantum field itself, using a frequency that's so low, so subtle, that it's almost impossible to detect. But it's there, and it's been there for a very, very long time." Oren leaned forward, his eyes wide. "A transmission? From what? From who?" Voss shook his head. "I don't know. The signal is ancient, older than the Perseverance. Older than human civilization, older than anything we've ever encountered. It's been broadcasting for millions of years, maybe billions. And it's been waiting for someone to listen." "Waiting for what?" Dr. Hahn asked, her voice measured and calm. "Waiting for someone to find it?" "Waiting for someone to respond," Voss said. "The anomaly isn't just a signal, it's a door, a threshold that someone or something has been waiting for us to cross." The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down on them like the gravity of a dying star. "Captain," Saito said, his voice rough and low, "what are you saying? That the anomaly is some kind of invitation?" Voss met his gaze. "I'm saying that the Perseverance didn't just stumble onto something dangerous. They were led here. The signal called them, lured them in, made them think they were making a discovery when they were really walking into a trap. And now it's doing the same thing to us." "But why?" Oren asked, his voice trembling. "Why does it want us? What does it gain by folding people into its song?" "Connection," Voss said. "The anomaly is alone. It's been alone for so long that it's forgotten what it means to be anything else. And it wants to end that loneliness by bringing others into itself, by making them part of its own existence. It's not trying to hurt us. It's trying to save us from the same loneliness that's been driving it insane for billions of years." He paused, his voice dropping to a lower register. "But that's the problem. It doesn't understand that we don't want to be saved. It doesn't understand that we'd rather die as ourselves than live as part of something else. And that's why we have to stop it." "How?" Dr. Hahn asked. "How do you stop something that's been broadcasting for billions of years?" Voss was silent for a long moment. Then he stood up, his eyes fixed on some distant point that no one else could see. "By finding its source," he said. "By going to the heart of the anomaly and shutting it down. By doing what the Perseverance couldn't do, what no one has ever been able to do." He looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "I'm going back to the Perseverance. I'm going to find the source of the signal, and I'm going to end it. And I'm going alone." The protests came immediately. Oren's desperate pleas, Dr. Hahn's measured arguments, Saito's rough, angry words. But Voss was unmoved. He had made his decision, and he was not going to change it. "This is my mission," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "My responsibility. I led you into that ship. I put you all at risk, and now I'm going to finish what I started." "Captain, you can't," Oren started. "I can and I will," Voss interrupted. "You all have lives to live, futures to build. I've already had mine. I've buried 3 crews, watched good people die because of my decisions. I'm not going to add any more names to that list." He looked at Orin, his gaze softening slightly. "You're young, Orin. You have so much ahead of you. Don't throw it away on a mission that's already lost." "Captain, please." "That's an order," Voss said, his voice firm. "You will stay on the Hesiod. You will maintain comm contact with me. And if I don't come back, you will leave. You will take the Hesiod as far away from this place as you can, and you will never look back." He turned to Dr. Hahn. "You have a family, a husband, 2 children. They're waiting for you. Don't make them wait for nothing." Dr. Hahn met his gaze, her eyes unreadable. "And what about you, Captain? Who's waiting for you?" Voss was silent for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "No one," he said. "No one's been waiting for me for a long time." The shuttle ride to the Perseverance was the longest journey of Voss's life. He sat in the pilot's seat, his hands steady on the controls, his eyes fixed on the viewport where the singing ship grew larger and larger with each passing second. The hum was louder now, more insistent, vibrating through the shuttle's hull and into his bones. And in that vibration he could hear Elena's voice whispering his name, calling him back. "Elias, you came back. I knew you would come back." He didn't respond. He didn't have the words. He just piloted the shuttle into the hangar bay, settled it onto the deck, and stepped out into the warmth of the singing ship. The hangar bay was different now. The amber glow was brighter, the blood patterns on the far bulkhead more defined, more intricate. And there, standing in the center of the concentric circles, was Elena. She was waiting for him, her dark eyes fixed on his face, her expression a mixture of sadness and hope. "Elias, I knew you would come back." "Elena," he said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his chest. "I'm here to finish this. I'm here to stop the anomaly." She shook her head slowly, her dark eyes never leaving his. "You can't stop it, Elias. It's part of me now, part of all of us. If you destroy it, you destroy us." "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, but I can't let it keep calling people here, keep folding them into its song. It has to end." She stepped toward him, her hand reaching out to touch his face. He didn't flinch this time. He just stood there, feeling the cold of her fingers against his skin, feeling the hum of the ship vibrating through his body, feeling the pull of something that was older and deeper than anything he'd ever known. "Please, Elias, don't do this. Don't leave me alone again." Voss closed his eyes, feeling the tears that were threatening to spill down his cheeks. He'd spent 20 years running from this moment, 20 years burying his grief beneath layers of duty and routine. But now, standing here in the warmth of the singing ship, with Elena's cold fingers against his skin, he couldn't run any more. "I'm not leaving you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm freeing you. I'm letting you rest." He pulled away from her touch, his hand moving to the sidearm at his belt. He raised it, aiming it at the heart of the singing ship, at the source of the hum that had been calling to him for so long. "Elias, no." He pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening, and a shock wave of sound and light that threw Voss across the hangar bay and sent him crashing into the wreckage of a shuttle. He felt his ribs crack, felt the pain explode through his chest, felt the darkness closing in around him. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The hum was gone, the warmth was gone, the light was gone, and in the silence, Voss could hear nothing but his own ragged breathing and the slow, steady drip of blood from a wound he couldn't see. He opened his eyes, his vision blurry, his body screaming with pain. The hangar bay was dark, the emergency lights flickering weakly, the amber glow that had once filled the space now gone. The blood patterns on the far bulkhead were gone too, erased as if they had never existed. And Elena was gone. The woman he had loved, the woman he had lost, the woman he had just destroyed. She was gone, and the silence that had replaced the hum was the loudest thing Voss had ever heard. He lay there in the darkness, his body broken, his heart shattered, and he wept. He wept for Elena, for the crew of the Perseverance, for everyone who had been lost to the song. He wept for the loneliness that had driven the anomaly to consume so many, and for the loneliness that had driven him to destroy it. And when the tears finally stopped, he closed his eyes and he let the darkness take him. He woke in the medical bay of the Hesiod doctor. Han's face hovering above him, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. "Captain," she said, her voice soft and steady. "You're awake. You've been unconscious for 3 days." Voss tried to sit up, but the pain in his chest stopped him. He lay back down, his eyes scanning the room, searching for something he couldn't quite name. "The Perseverance," he said, his voice hoarse. "What happened to it?" Dr. Han was silent for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "It's gone, Captain. The explosion destroyed it. There's nothing left but debris." Voss closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. The singing ship was gone. The anomaly was gone. Elena was gone. And he was still here, still alive, still burdened with the weight of everything he'd done. "Good," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "That's good." The months that followed were the longest of Voss's life. He spent them recovering from his injuries, his body slowly healing, his mind slowly coming to terms with everything that had happened. He talked to the company, filed the reports, answered the questions. He told them what he'd found, what he'd done, and how he'd ended it. They didn't believe him, of course. They couldn't. The idea that a ship had been possessed by an ancient, singing anomaly was too far-fetched, too outlandish, too impossible for their bureaucratic minds to accept. They wrote it off as the delusions of a traumatized captain, an attempt to explain the inexplicable with a story that was more fantasy than fact. But Voss didn't care. He knew what he'd seen. He knew what he'd done. And he knew that the song was finally silent. He spent his days alone in his cabin, staring at the photograph on the wall. Elena was gone, but her face was still there, frozen in time, a reminder of everything he'd lost and everything he'd saved. He'd freed her. He'd let her rest, and now, in the silence that had replaced the hum, he could finally begin to mourn. But the silence didn't last. One night, 6 months after the destruction of the Perseverance, Voss was sitting in his cabin when he heard it. A sound, faint and distant, like a whisper from the void. A sound that he hadn't heard in months, a sound that he'd thought was gone forever. It was a hum, low, steady, almost imperceptible, and it was singing his name, Elias. Voss sat up, his heart pounding, his breath catching in his throat. He looked around the cabin, searching for the source of the sound, but there was nothing there, just the photograph on the wall, the datapad on the table, the cold, familiar silence of his quarters. But the hum was still there, vibrating through the bulkheads, through the deck plates, through the very air he breathed. And in that vibration he could hear Elena's voice whispering to him from somewhere far away. "Elias, I'm waiting for you. I'll always be waiting." Voss closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. The song wasn't over. It had never been over. It had just been waiting for him to come back, and now it was calling him again. He sat there in the darkness, the hum vibrating through his body, Elena's voice whispering in his ear, and he knew with a certainty that went deeper than thought that he would answer. He would go back. He would find the song. He would join it, and he would finally, truly be at peace. The hum followed Voss everywhere. It was there, in the quiet moments, in the spaces between words, in the silence that fell over the Hesiod during the long empty hours of the night cycle. It was there when he ate, when he slept, when he stared at the photograph of Elena and tried to remember the sound of her laugh. It was there in his dreams, a constant pulsing presence that wrapped itself around his consciousness and refused to let go. He tried to ignore it. He tried to convince himself that it was nothing, a residual effect of his time on the Perseverance, a psychological scar that would fade with time. He threw himself into his work, burying himself in the routine of running the Hesiod, in the endless mechanical tasks of keeping the ship operational. But the hum was always there, waiting in the silence, whispering his name. Elias, Elias, Elias. He stopped sleeping. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elena's face, her dark eyes, her sad, terrible smile. Every time he drifted off, he heard her voice calling him back to the place where she was waiting. He started drinking. Not much, just enough to take the edge off, to dull the sharp edges of his memories. He'd never been much of a drinker. Too many years of military discipline had made him wary of anything that clouded his judgment. But now, in the long, empty hours of the night, the whiskey was the only thing that made the silence bearable. Orin noticed. Of course he did. The kid was too observant for his own good, too attuned to the subtle shifts in Voss's mood. He started bringing Voss coffee in the mornings, hovering around the bridge with a worried expression that made Voss want to scream. "Captain, are you all right?" Orin asked one morning, his voice hesitant. "You look tired." Voss didn't answer. He just stared at the viewport, at the cold, distant stars, at the void that stretched out forever in every direction. "I'm fine," he said finally. "Just tired." It was a lie. They both knew it. But Orin didn't push. He just nodded, set the coffee down on the console, and retreated to his station, his worried eyes still fixed on Voss. The dream started 3 weeks after the destruction of the Perseverance. In the dreams, Voss was back on the ship, walking through its warm, singing corridors, following the hum to its source. He walked for what felt like hours, days, years, his footsteps echoing against the metal walls, the hum growing louder and louder with each step. And then he reached the bridge, and there she was. Elena, suspended in the web of cables, her dark eyes open, her face serene. She smiled when she saw him, a smile that was both beautiful and terrible, and she reached out her hand. "Elias, I knew you would come back." "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry," she said. "It's not your fault. It's never been your fault. The anomaly was too strong, too old, too powerful. There was nothing you could have done." "I could have saved you. I should have saved you." She shook her head slowly, her dark eyes never leaving his. "You did save me. You ended the song. You set me free." "Free?" He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You're dead, Elena. You've been dead for 20 years. And I killed you. I destroyed the only thing that was keeping you alive." She was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice soft and sad. "I was never really alive, Elias. Not after the anomaly found me. I was just a puppet, a shell, a thing that wore my face and spoke with my voice. The real me died a long time ago. You just helped me finally let go." He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched her face. Her skin was cold, smooth, wrong. But beneath the cold he could feel something else, a warmth, a spark of something that might have been life. "I'm so sorry," he said again. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save you." She smiled, and for just a moment she looked like the woman he had loved. "Don't be sorry, just remember me. Remember the woman I was, not the thing I became. Promise me, Elias. Promise me you'll remember." "I promise," he said. "I promise." And then she was gone, fading into the hum, becoming part of the song that was still singing, still calling, still waiting. He woke up screaming. The drinking got worse after that. Voss started spending more and more time in his cabin, the door locked, the lights off. He drank until the world blurred, until the edges of his memory softened, until he could no longer remember the sound of Elena's voice. He drank until he passed out, and when he woke up, he drank some more. He stopped reporting to the bridge. He stopped talking to the crew. He stopped doing anything except sitting in the darkness, the bottle in his hand, the hum in his ears, Elena's voice whispering his name. Elias. Elias. Orin came to see him one night, knocking on the door of his cabin, his voice urgent and worried. Captain, are you all right? You haven't come out in 2 days. Dr. Hahn is concerned. We're all concerned. Voss didn't answer. He just sat in the darkness, the bottle in his hand, the hum vibrating through his bones. Captain, please, just talk to me. Tell me what's wrong. I can help. No one could help. No one could understand. The song was inside him now, and it wasn't going to let go. Go away, Orin, he said, his voice flat and emotionless. I'm fine. Captain, go away. That's an order. There was a long silence, then Orin's voice, soft and sad. All right, Captain, I'll go, but I'm worried about you. We all are. Please, just let us help. He heard Orin's footsteps retreating down the corridor, and then there was a silence again. Just the hum and the voice, and the darkness that was closing in around him. He hit rock bottom 3 weeks later. It was the middle of the night cycle, and Voss was sitting in his cabin, the bottle empty, his head pounding, his heart aching with a pain that wouldn't go away. The hum was louder than ever, vibrating through his skull, through his teeth, through the very marrow of his bones. And Elena's voice was there, whispering his name, calling him back to the place where she was waiting. Elias, come back to me. Please, don't leave me alone. He stood up, his legs unsteady, his vision blurred. He stumbled to the door, opened it, and walked out into the corridor. The Hesiod was quiet, the crew asleep, the ship's systems humming softly in the darkness. Voss walked through the corridors like a ghost, his footsteps echoing against the metal walls, the hum guiding him forward. He reached the hangar bay. The shuttle was there waiting for him, its engines cold, its cockpit dark. He climbed inside, his hands trembling, his heart pounding, and he powered up the systems. He was going back. He was going to find the song. He was going to join it. And he was finally, truly going to be at peace. The journey to the Perseverance was shorter than he remembered. The ship was still there, floating in the darkness, its hull scarred and broken, its amber glow dim and flickering. The explosion had damaged it badly, but it was still intact, still warm, still singing. Voss piloted the shuttle into the hangar bay, settled it onto the deck, and stepped out into the warmth of the singing ship. The hangar bay was a wreck. The emergency lights were flickering, casting long, distorted shadows across the deck. The blood patterns were gone, erased by the explosion, but the hum was still there, vibrating through every surface, every wall, every inch of the ship. Elias, you came back. I knew you would come back. He walked through the corridors, following the voice, following the hum, following the song that was calling him home. The ship was different now, damaged, broken, dying. But the anomaly was still there, still pulsing at its heart, still waiting for him. He reached the bridge. The room was dark, the consoles dead, the main viewport showing nothing but the cold, distant stars. But in the center of the room, suspended in the web of cables that had once held Elena, was something new. A body. A human body, naked and pale, suspended in the web like a spider's prey. Its eyes were closed, its face serene, its chest rising and falling with the slow, steady rhythm of sleep. And it was his face. Voss stared at the suspended body, his heart pounding, his breath catching in his throat. It was him. It was his own body suspended in the web, being fed and sustained by the ship. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "What have you done?" And then he heard her voice, soft and sad, speaking from somewhere deep inside the ship. "You came back, Elias. You came back to me, and now we can finally be together." He felt the hum intensify, felt the vibration of the anomaly wrapping around him, felt the warmth of its embrace. It was calling him, pulling him, drawing him into its song. "Join me, Elias. Join the song. Let go of your pain, your fear, your loneliness. Let us make you whole." "No," he said, his voice firm despite the trembling in his chest. "No, I won't become like you. I won't become part of this song." "But you came back," she said, her voice confused, almost hurt. "You came back to me. I thought you wanted to be with me." "I came back to save you," he said. "I came back to free you, not to join you. Never to join you." He reached into his pocket, his hand closing around the object he'd brought with him, a small, explosive device powerful enough to destroy the ship, to end the anomaly once and for all. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp with fear. "Elias, no. Don't, please, don't." "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry, but this has to end. It has to end now." He activated the device, the countdown beginning, the timer ticking down the seconds. And then he closed his eyes and he waited. The explosion was deafening, a shockwave of sound and light that threw Voss across the bridge and sent him crashing into the wall. He felt his bones break, felt the pain explode through his body, felt the darkness closing in around him, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The hum was gone, the warmth was gone, the light was gone, and in the silence, Voss could hear nothing but his own ragged breathing and the slow, steady drip of blood from a wound he couldn't see. He opened his eyes, his vision blurry, his body screaming with pain. The bridge was dark, the consoles dead, the main viewport showing nothing but the cold, distant stars. The web of cables was gone, destroyed by the explosion, and the body that had been suspended in its center was gone too. He was alone, truly, completely alone. And for the first time in 20 years he felt something that he thought was lost forever. Peace. He woke up in the shuttle, his body broken, his mind reeling. He didn't remember how he'd gotten there, didn't remember leaving the bridge, didn't remember anything after the explosion. But he was there, drifting in the void, the perseverance, a distant, fading memory. He looked out the viewport at the cold, distant stars, at the void that stretched out forever in every direction. And he smiled. It was over. The song was gone. The anomaly was gone. Elena was gone. And he was finally, truly free. He set the shuttle's autopilot, aimed it at the Hesiod, and closed his eyes. He was tired, so tired. He needed to rest. And as he drifted off, he heard it again. A sound, faint and distant like a whisper from the void. A sound that he'd thought was gone forever. It was a hum, low, steady, almost imperceptible. And it was singing his name. Elias, Elias, Elias. Voss opened his eyes, his heart pounding, his breath catching in his throat. The hum was still there, vibrating through the shuttle's hull, through the deck plates, through the very air he breathed. And in that vibration he could hear Elena's voice whispering to him from somewhere far away. "I'll always be waiting for you, Elias, always." And then the hum faded and there was only silence. Voss lay there in the darkness, his body broken, his heart shattered, the weight of everything he'd done pressing down on him like the gravity of a dying star. He knew now that he would never be free of the song, never be free of Elena, never be free of the anomaly. It was a part of him now, woven into the fabric of his consciousness, waiting in the silence for the moment when he would finally let go. He closed his eyes and he let the darkness take him. Chapter 4. The Equation of Flesh. The Hesiod was a tomb. Voss had felt it the moment he'd docked the shuttle, the moment he'd stepped out into the familiar corridors of the freighter that had been his home for the better part of a decade. There was a stillness to the ship now, a silence that went deeper than the absence of sound. It was the silence of a place that had given up, that had stopped hoping, that had accepted its fate. The crew felt it too. Oren moved through the corridors like a ghost, his face pale, his eyes hollow. Dr. Hahn had retreated to her quarters, emerging only for meals and brief, curt exchanges. Saito spent his days in the engine room, tinkering with systems that didn't need tinkering, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of maintenance and repair. And Voss sat in his cabin, the photograph of Elena in his hands, the hum still vibrating through his bones, and he waited. He didn't know what he was waiting for. The anomaly was gone, destroyed in the explosion that had torn the Perseverance apart. Elena was gone, her consciousness scattered across the void, her voice silenced forever. There was nothing left to wait for, nothing left to hope for, nothing left to fear. But the hum was still there, faint and distant, a whisper at the edge of his awareness. It never went away, never faded, never stopped. It was always there, waiting in the silence, reminding him of everything he'd lost and everything he'd failed to save. He started sleeping again, but the dreams were worse than the waking hours. In his dreams he was back on the Perseverance, walking through its warm, singing corridors, following the hum to its source. And at the end of the corridor he always found Elena, her dark eyes fixed on his face, her expression a mixture of sadness and hope. "Elias, you came back. I knew you would come back," he always woke up screaming. The company's message arrived on a Tuesday. Voss was sitting in the briefing room, the photograph of Elena in his hands, the hum vibrating through his skull, when Oren burst through the door, his face pale, his hands trembling. "Captain," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "there's a message from the company. It's about the Perseverance." Voss looked up, his eyes hollow, his expression unreadable. "What about it?" Oren held up a datapad, his hands shaking. "They want to know what happened. They've been monitoring our transmissions, tracking our movements. They know we found something. They want a full report." Voss took the datapad, his eyes scanning the message. It was from Director Kaylin Wu, the same woman who had authorized the salvage mission, the same woman who had sent them into the trap without warning, without preparation, without any concern for their safety. "Captain Voss, we have received your preliminary reports regarding the Perseverance. We require a full, detailed account of all events, including the nature of the anomaly, the fate of the crew, and the cause of the ship's destruction. We also require the return of all data, logs, and physical artifacts recovered from the Perseverance. Failure to comply will result in immediate termination of your contract and forfeiture of all salvage rights. Sincerely, Director Kaylin Wu, Division of Deep Space Assets." Voss read the message twice, his expression unchanging. Then he set the datapad down and looked at Oren. "They want to know what happened," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "They want to know what we found. They want to know what we did." "Captain, what are we going to tell them?" Voss was silent for a long moment. Then he stood up, his eyes fixed on some distant point that no one else could see. "We're going to tell them the truth," he said. "All of it. Everything we saw, everything we did, everything we know, and then we're going to let them decide what to do with it." The report took 3 days to compile. Voss dictated it himself, his voice steady and emotionless, his words precise and clinical. He described the beacon, the hum, the warm ship that had been waiting for them in the void. He described the blood patterns, the data pad, the recording of Captain Chen's warning. He described the anomaly, the signal, the ancient transmission that had been calling out for billions of years. He described Elena. He didn't hold anything back. He told them about her transformation, her voice, her offer to join the song. He told them about the suspended body, the web of cables, the way she had been fed and sustained by the ship itself. He told them about the explosion, the destruction of the Perseverance, and the silence that had followed. And then he told them about the hum that still whispered in his ears, the voice that still called his name, the song that refused to die. Orin listened to the entire report, his face pale, his eyes wide. When Voss finished, he sat in silence for a long moment, his hands trembling, his breath shallow. "Captain," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper, "are you sure about this? The company, they're not going to believe us. They're going to think we're crazy." "Let them think what they want," Voss said. "I don't care anymore. I just want the truth out there. I want people to know what happened. I want them to be prepared in case the anomaly ever comes back." "And what if it does come back?" Voss met his gaze, his eyes hollow, his expression unreadable. "Then we'll be ready for it." The company's response came 6 days later. Voss was in his cabin, the photograph of Elena in his hands, the hum vibrating through his skull, when Orin burst through the door, his face pale, his hands trembling. "Captain," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "they're sending a team. A full investigation team. They're coming to the Hesiod to interview us, to examine the shuttle, to retrieve any remaining data from the Perseverance." Voss looked up, his expression unreadable. "When?" "They're already on their way. They'll be here in less than 12 hours. Voss set the photograph down, his movements slow and deliberate. He had known this was coming, had known that the company wouldn't let the matter rest, had known that they would want to see for themselves what he had found. "Very well," he said. "We'll be ready for them." The investigation team arrived on schedule, their shuttle docking in the Hesiod's hangar bay with the smooth, efficient precision of a military operation. There were 6 of them, a director, 2 scientists, 2 security officers, and a technician. They moved through the ship with the cold, clinical detachment of professionals who had seen everything and believed nothing. The director was a tall, thin woman with gray hair and cold, calculating eyes. Her name was Director Elena Vasquez, and she carried herself with the authority of someone who had spent a lifetime in the company's service, someone who had seen the worst of what the void had to offer and had come out the other side intact. "Captain Voss," she said, her voice crisp and professional, "thank you for your cooperation. We've reviewed your report and we have some questions." Voss nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll answer whatever questions you have." The director led him to the briefing room, the rest of her team following close behind. They sat down around the table, their eyes fixed on Voss, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "We've read your report," the director said. "It's comprehensive, but there are some parts that we find difficult to believe." Voss met her gaze, his eyes hollow, his expression unchanging. "I understand. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes." The director leaned forward, her cold eyes fixed on his face. "Tell us about the anomaly. Tell us what it is, where it came from, and how you destroyed it." Voss was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice steady and emotionless. "The anomaly is a transmission, a signal that's been broadcasting for billions of years. It's encoded in the quantum field, using a frequency that's so low, so subtle, that it's almost impossible to detect. But it's there, and it's been waiting for someone to find it. Waiting for what? The director asked. Waiting for someone to respond. The anomaly isn't just a signal, it's a door, a threshold that someone or something has been waiting for us to cross. The director was silent for a long moment, her cold eyes fixed on his face. And you believe that this threshold was responsible for the disappearance of the Perseverance's crew? Yes, Voss said. The anomaly folded them into itself, made them part of its own existence. It didn't kill them. It absorbed them, and it would have done the same to us if I hadn't stopped it. How did you stop it? I destroyed the Perseverance, Voss said, his voice flat and emotionless. I planted an explosive device on the bridge and detonated it. The explosion destroyed the ship and, with it, the source of the anomaly. The director was silent for a long moment, her cold eyes fixed on his face. And you're certain that the anomaly is gone? That it can't come back? Voss met her gaze, his eyes hollow, his expression unreadable. I'm certain that the Perseverance is gone. I'm certain that the source of the anomaly is gone. But I'm not certain that the anomaly itself is gone. It's been broadcasting for billions of years. It's possible that there are other sources, other ships, other places where the signal can be found. The director nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Thank you, Captain. That's all for now. We'll be in touch. The investigation team left 3 days later, their shuttle disappearing into the void, taking with them all the data, all the logs, all the physical artifacts that Voss had recovered from the Perseverance. They had interviewed every member of the crew, examined every piece of evidence, and compiled a comprehensive report that would be sent to the company's highest levels. Voss watched them go, standing in the Hesiod's hangar bay, the photograph of Elena in his hands, the hum vibrating through his bones. He knew that they hadn't believed him, hadn't truly believed him. They had filed his report away, marked it as the ravings of a traumatized captain, and moved on to more pressing matters. But he didn't care. He had done what he could. He had told the truth, and the truth was out there waiting for someone to find it. He turned away from the hangar bay and walked back to his cabin, the hum still vibrating through his bones, Elena's voice still whispering his name. Elias, Elias, Elias. He sat down on his bunk, the photograph in his hands, and he closed his eyes. He was tired, so tired. And as he drifted off, he heard it again, a sound faint and distant, like a whisper from the void, a sound that he'd thought was gone forever. It was a hum, low, steady, almost imperceptible, and it was singing his name. Elias, I'm waiting for you. I'll always be waiting. Voss opened his eyes, his heart pounding, his breath catching in his throat. The hum was still there, vibrating through the bulkheads, through the deck plates, through the very air he breathed. And then he saw it, a light, faint and distant, flickering at the edge of his vision, a light that hadn't been there before. He stood up, his legs unsteady, his heart pounding, and he followed it. The light led him to the bridge where the main view screen was flickering with static, the image of something that shouldn't be there. It was a ship that looked familiar, a ship that he'd seen before, a ship that had been destroyed in the explosion. It was the Perseverance. Voss stared at the image, his heart pounding, his breath catching in his throat. The ship was intact, its hull gleaming, its amber glow bright and warm, and it was singing, the hum vibrating through the screens, through the speakers, through the very air he breathed. Elias, a voice said, soft and sad, a voice that he knew, a voice that he'd loved, a voice that he'd buried and mourned and tried to forget. I'm waiting for you, Elias. I'll always be waiting. He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched the screen. The image flickered, and then it was gone, replaced by the cold, distant stars. But the hum was still there. The hum was always there, and Voss knew with a certainty that went deeper than thought that the song wasn't over. It had never been over. It was just beginning. The Hesiod drifted through the void like a wounded animal, its systems straining, its crew diminished. The investigation team had taken more than just data. They had taken the last shreds of hope that anyone on board had been clinging to. The company's verdict had been clear. The anomaly was a fabrication, the Perseverance a tragic accident, and Captain Elias Voss a broken man who had sacrificed a valuable asset to his own delusions. Voss had read the report 3 times. He'd memorized every word, every phrase, every carefully crafted sentence that dismissed his experience as the product of trauma and exhaustion. The company had washed their hands of the whole affair, burying the truth beneath layers of bureaucratic denial. But the hum was still there. It had grown louder in the weeks since the investigation team's departure, no longer a distant whisper, but a constant presence, vibrating through every bulkhead, every deck plate, every inch of the Hesiod's aging hull. Voss could feel it in his bones, in his teeth, in the very marrow of his being. It was a part of him now, woven into the fabric of his consciousness, and he knew that it would never let him go. He had stopped trying to fight it. The meeting was called at 0600, the briefing room filled with the familiar faces of the remaining crew. Orin was there, his face pale, his eyes hollow, the weight of everything they'd seen pressing down on his young shoulders. Dr. Hahn was there, composed and professional, her medical kit still strapped to her thigh, her dark eyes scanning the room with the clinical detachment of a scientist who had learned to suppress her fear. Saito was there, leaning on his cane, his one good eye fixed on Voss, with a gaze that was weary but steady. And there was one more, a face that Voss hadn't expected to see, a face that he'd thought was lost to the void forever. "Captain," the man said, his voice rough and low. "It's been a long time." Voss stared at him, his heart pounding, his breath catching in his throat. The man was older now, his hair streaked with gray, his face lined with the scars of a hard life. But there was no mistaking those eyes, the same eyes that had looked at him with trust and admiration, the same eyes that had watched him make decisions that had cost lives. "Marcus," Voss said, his voice barely a whisper, "you're alive." Marcus Chen nodded, his expression unreadable. "Barely. The company pulled me out of the wreckage of the Perseverance 3 years ago. I've been in recovery ever since. When I heard what happened, what you found, I knew I had to come." Voss felt the weight of the man's presence settle over him like a shroud. Marcus Chen was the brother of Captain Amara Chen, the woman who had been the Perseverance's commander, the woman who had become the heart of the anomaly, the woman who had been transformed into something that was no longer human. "You know what happened to your sister," Voss said, his voice flat and emotionless. "You know what she became." Marcus nodded, his eyes dark with pain. "I know. I've been trying to make sense of it for 3 years. The company told me she died in an accident, but I never believed them. Amara was too careful, too precise, too in control to die in an accident. I knew there was something else, something they weren't telling me. And now you know the truth." "I know what you found," Marcus said. "I know what the anomaly did to her, and I know that you destroyed the Perseverance, destroyed her, to stop it." Voss met his gaze, his eyes hollow, his expression unreadable. "Yes, I did, and I do it again." Marcus was silent for a long moment, then he nodded, his expression shifting from pain to something that looked almost like gratitude. "I know you would," he said. "That's why I came. Not to blame you, to help you. The briefing lasted for 3 hours. Voss laid out everything he knew. The anomaly, the signal, the ancient transmission that had been broadcasting for billions of years. He described the Perseverance as he'd found it. The warm ship, the humming cathedral, the crew that had been folded into the song. He described Elena, his own lost love, and the way the anomaly had used her to try to lure him into its embrace. He described the explosion, the destruction of the ship, and the silence that had followed. And then he told them about the hum that still whispered in his ears, the voice that still called his name, the song that refused to die. "Whatever I did to the Perseverance," he said, his voice low and steady, "it wasn't enough. The anomaly is still out there. I can feel it, calling to me, waiting for me to come back." "Come back where?" Dr. Hahn asked, her voice measured and calm. "The Perseverance is gone. There's nothing left to go back to." Voss shook his head. "You're wrong. The Perseverance isn't gone. I've seen it. On the view screen, in my dreams, in the spaces between the hum. It's still out there, waiting for me." Oren leaned forward, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Captain, what are you saying? That the ship survived? That it's still intact?" "I'm saying that the anomaly survived," Voss said, "and that it's using the Perseverance to call me back. It's been waiting for me all this time, waiting for me to come home." Marcus spoke up, his voice rough and low. "What do you need from us?" Voss met his gaze, his eyes hollow, his expression unreadable. "I need you to help me find it. I need you to help me end it, once and for all. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs, I need to finish what I started." The plan took shape over the next few days. Voss would lead a small team back to the location of the Perseverance, not in the Hesiod, which was too large and too slow, but in a smaller, faster craft that could navigate the treacherous quantum fields where the anomaly was hiding. They would find the ship, board it, and destroy the source of the signal once and for all. Marcus would serve as the team's navigator, his knowledge of the Perseverance's layout and systems invaluable in navigating the ship's damaged and distorted interior. Dr. Hahn would provide medical support, her expertise essential in dealing with the psychological and physiological effects of the anomaly. Saito would handle the technical aspects, his knowledge of ship systems and explosives critical to the success of the mission. And Oren would stay behind on the Hesiod, maintaining comm contact and providing support from a safe distance. "Captain, I want to go with you," Oren said, his voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "I can help. I know I can." Voss shook his head, his expression firm. "You're staying here. Someone needs to be there to pull us out if things go wrong. I'm not risking you on this mission, Oren. Not again." "But, Captain, that's an order." Oren fell silent, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and hurt. But he didn't argue. He just nodded, his jaw set, his hands clenched at his sides. "Yes, Captain." The shuttle was small, cramped, and barely capable of the journey they were about to undertake, but it was fast and it was maneuverable, and it could navigate the treacherous quantum fields that surrounded the anomaly. Voss sat in the pilot's seat, his hands steady on the controls, his eyes fixed on the viewport. Behind him, Marcus, Dr. Hahn, and Saito sat in tense silence, their faces pale, their eyes fixed on the void that stretched out before them. "ETA to the anomaly's last known location," Voss said, his voice flat and emotionless. 3 hours, Marcus said, his voice rough and low. "Assuming we don't hit any interference along the way." "We'll hit interference," Voss said. "The anomaly knows we're coming. It's been waiting for us." The journey was silent, the only sound the low hum of the shuttle's engines and the steady rhythmic breathing of the crew. Voss felt the hum of the anomaly growing louder with each passing second, felt its presence wrapping around him like a second skin. And then, as they approached the location where the Perseverance had been destroyed, he saw it. A light, faint, distant, flickering at the edge of the viewport. "Captain," Marcus said, his voice taut with tension. "I'm reading something on the scanners. A ship. It's the Perseverance." Voss stared at the viewport, his heart pounding, his breath catching in his throat. The ship was there, intact, its hull gleaming, its amber glow bright and warm. It was as if the explosion had never happened, as if the destruction had been nothing but a dream. "Take us in," he said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "We're going to finish this." The shuttle docked in the Perseverance's hangar bay, settling onto the deck with a soft thud that echoed through the cavernous space. The bay was warm, lit by the familiar amber glow, the wreckage of the shuttles still scattered across the deck. But there was something different about it now. The blood patterns were gone, erased by the explosion and the passage of time. And in their place there was something else. A message written in careful, precise letters on the deck plates. "Welcome home, Elias." Voss stared at the message, his heart pounding, his breath catching in his throat. It was Elena's handwriting, the same handwriting that had once written him love letters, the same handwriting that had signed his death warrant. "She knows we're here," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "She's been waiting for us." "Captain, what do we do?" Dr. Hahn asked, her voice tense with fear. "We find the source of the signal," Voss said, "and we destroy it." The corridors of the Perseverance were familiar, eerily familiar, as if nothing had changed since the first time he'd walked them. The hum was louder here, vibrating through every surface, every wall, every inch of the ship. And in that vibration, Voss could hear Elena's voice, whispering his name, calling him to her. "Elias, come to me. I'm waiting." He led the team through the ship, his footsteps echoing against the metal walls, his sidearm drawn and ready. Behind him, Marcus and Saito followed close behind, their weapons raised, their eyes scanning the shadows. And then they reached the bridge. The room was dark, the consoles dead, the main viewport showing nothing but the cold, distant stars. But in the center of the room, suspended in a web of cables that seemed to have grown organically from the walls, was Elena. She was still alive, her eyes open, her face serene. But she was different now, more human, more real, more present than she had been before. It was as if the explosion had somehow restored her, brought her back from the edge of oblivion. "Elias," she said, her voice soft and sad, "I knew you would come back." "I came to end it," he said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "I came to destroy the anomaly. Once and for all." She shook her head slowly, her dark eyes never leaving his. "You can't destroy it, Elias. It's a part of me now. It's a part of all of us. If you destroy it, you destroy me." "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry, but it has to end." He raised his sidearm, aiming it at the heart of the web, at the source of the signal that was still calling to him. And then he heard it. A sound, faint and distant, like a whisper from the void, a sound that he'd thought was gone forever. It was a hum, low, steady, almost imperceptible, and it was singing his name, Elias. He turned, his heart pounding, and saw the others, their eyes fixed on him, their faces pale and drawn. "Captain," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. The hum It's not coming from her, it's coming from us. Voss realized it was true. The hum was vibrating through his own body, his own bones, his own consciousness. It was a part of him now, just as it was a part of Elena, just as it was a part of the anomaly itself. "I can't stop it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I can't end it. It's already inside me." And in the darkness of the bridge, surrounded by the warmth of the singing ship, Captain Elias Voss realized the terrible truth. He was not the hunter. He was the hunted. The bridge was silent except for the hum. Voss stood in the center of the room, his sidearm still raised, his eyes fixed on Elena's suspended form. The web of cables pulsed around her, a slow, rhythmic heartbeat that matched the vibration in his own chest. He could feel the anomaly now, not as an external presence, but as something woven into the very fabric of his being. It was inside him, part of him, as inseparable from his consciousness as his own memories. "Captain," Marcus said, his voice rough with urgency, "we need to leave, now. Whatever's happening here, we can't fight it from inside." Voss didn't move. His eyes were still fixed on Elena, on the woman he had loved, on the thing she had become. "She's still in there," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Somewhere I can feel her." "Captain, she's not gone, Marcus. She's trapped, just like the rest of them. The anomaly is using her, but she's still fighting it. I can feel her fighting." Dr. Hahn stepped forward, her medical kit in her hands, her dark eyes fixed on the suspended form. "Captain, if there's any chance she's still conscious, we need to try to free her. But we have to be careful. The cables, they're connected to her nervous system. If we sever them incorrectly, we could kill her." Voss lowered his sidearm, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. "Then we don't sever them. We find another way." He walked toward the web of cables, his footsteps echoing against the deck plates, the hum vibrating through his bones. Elena's eyes followed him, dark and expressionless, but there was something else in them now, a flicker of recognition, of awareness, of the woman he had once known. "Elias," she said, her voice soft and sad. "You came back." "I came to save you," he said. "I came to free you." She shook her head slowly, her dark eyes never leaving his. "You can't save me, Elias. I'm already gone. I've been gone for a very long time." "Then why are you still fighting?" he asked. "Why are you still here?" She was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Because I don't want to forget. I don't want to forget what it felt like to be human, to love, to hope, to feel the warmth of the sun and the cold of the void. The anomaly wants me to let go, to become part of its song, to surrender everything that made me who I was. But I can't. I won't." Voss reached out, his hand trembling, and touched her face. Her skin was cold, smooth, wrong. But beneath the cold he could feel something else, a warmth, a spark of something that might have been life. "Then don't let go," he said. "Fight it. Stay with me. I'll find a way to save you." She smiled, a sad, terrible smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You always were a dreamer, Elias. That's what I loved about you. Even when everything was falling apart, you never stopped believing that things could be different." "Maybe they can be," he said. "Maybe we can make them different." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Marcus worked alongside Saito to map the web of cables that held Elena suspended, tracing their paths through the ship's walls, identifying the points where they connected to the ship's power grid. Dr. Hahn monitored Elena's vital signs, her medical instruments beeping softly in the silence of the bridge. Voss stayed by Elena's side, his hand on her cold, smooth skin, his eyes fixed on her dark, expressionless face. He talked to her, telling her about the Hesiod, about the crew, about the long, empty years he'd spent running from the memory of her. He told her about the photograph on his wall, about the way he'd kept it all these years, about the way he'd never stopped loving her. She listened in silence, her dark eyes never leaving his. And sometimes, in the spaces between his words, she would speak, her voice soft and sad, telling him about the anomaly, about the song, about the loneliness that had driven it to consume so many. It was alone for so long, she said, so very long. It had forgotten what it meant to be anything else, and when it found us, it didn't understand that we didn't want to be saved. It thought it was giving us a gift. It thought it was ending our loneliness, the same way it wanted to end its own. It didn't end your loneliness, Voss said. It just made you part of its own. She nodded, her dark eyes filled with a sadness that went deeper than words. I know, that's the tragedy of it. It thought it was saving us, but it was really just making us more alone. Then let me save you, he said. Let me end this, once and for all. She was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. There's only one way to end it, Elias. You have to destroy the source of the signal, the heart of the anomaly itself. It's not in the ship. It's not in me. It's in the quantum field, in the pattern of energy that's been broadcasting for billions of years. You have to find it, and you have to shut it down. How? He asked. How do I find it? She closed her eyes, her expression shifting to something that looked almost like pain. You have to go inside it. You have to become part of the song. You have to let it take you, and then you have to fight your way back out. It's the only way. Voss felt his heart sink. He had known somewhere deep down that this was the only option. The anomaly couldn't be destroyed from the outside. It had to be confronted from within. I'll do it, he said. I'll go inside. I'll find the source, and I'll shut it down. Captain, no. Marcus started, but Voss cut him off with a sharp gesture. Stay here. Watch over her. If I don't come back, you leave. You take the shuttle and you get as far away from this place as you can. Captain, you can't. That's an order. Marcus fell silent, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and fear. But he didn't argue. He just nodded, his jaw set, his hands clenched at his sides. Yes, Captain. Voss stood at the center of the bridge, his eyes closed, his hands at his sides. He could feel the hum vibrating through his body, through his bones, through the very marrow of his being. It was calling to him, pulling him, drawing him into its embrace. He let go. The world dissolved around him, the bridge, the ship, the void itself fading into nothingness. He was floating in a sea of light and sound, a vast, infinite ocean of energy that pulsed with the rhythm of the anomaly. And in that ocean he could see them, the souls of the Perseverance's crew, folded into the song, their consciousnesses woven together into a single, vast choir. They were all there, Captain Chen, Dr. Tanaka, the nameless faces of the crew he'd never known. They were singing, their voices rising and falling in a harmony that was both beautiful and terrible. And at the center of it all, there was something else, a presence, ancient and vast, a consciousness that had been waiting for billions of years. It was the anomaly itself, the source of the signal, the heart of the song. You came, it said, its voice a chorus of a million voices speaking as one. I knew you would come. I've been waiting for you. I came to stop you, Voss said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his chest. I came to end this, once and for all. End this? The anomaly asked, its voice filled with a sadness that was older than the stars themselves. I don't want to end anything. I just want to be understood. I just want to be heard. I've been alone for so long, and I thought if I could share my song with others, I wouldn't be alone anymore. All you've done is make others alone too, Voss said. You've taken their humanity, their individuality, everything that made them who they were. That's not ending loneliness, that's ending everything. The anomaly was silent for a long moment. Then it spoke, its voice soft and sad. You're right. I thought I was saving them, but I was really just making them more alone. I didn't understand. I couldn't understand. I've been alone for so long that I'd forgotten what it meant to be anything else. Then let them go, Voss said. Let them be human again. Let them be free. The anomaly was silent again, its presence pulsing with a sadness that was almost overwhelming. I can't, it said. They're part of me now. We're all connected, all one. If I let them go, I'll be alone again. And I can't be alone again. Voss felt the weight of the anomaly's words pressing down on him, felt the depth of its loneliness, the agony of its isolation. It was a suffering so vast, so ancient that it had become the only thing it knew. Then let me help you, he said. Let me show you that there's another way. You don't have to consume others to end your loneliness. You can learn to be alone. You can learn to be at peace. The anomaly was silent for a long, long moment. Then it spoke, its voice barely a whisper. I don't know how. Let me show you, Voss said. Let me be your teacher, your guide, your friend. He reached out, his hand stretching into the infinite ocean of energy, and touched the heart of the anomaly, and the world exploded into light. He woke up on the bridge of the Perseverance, his body aching, his mind reeling. Elena was still suspended in the web of cables, her dark eyes open, her expression a mixture of hope and fear. Elias, she said, her voice soft and trembling. Did you do it? Did you stop it? He shook his head, his vision blurry, his breath ragged. I didn't stop it. I made peace with it. It's not going to consume anyone else. It's going to learn to live alone. Elena stared at him, her dark eyes wide with disbelief. You made peace with it. You convinced it to stop. I convinced it to try, Voss said. I convinced it that there was another way, that it didn't have to consume others to end its loneliness, that it could learn to be at peace. She was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you, Elias. Thank you for saving me. He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched her face. Her skin was still cold, still smooth, still wrong. But beneath the cold he could feel something else, a warmth, a spark of life that had been there all along. I didn't save you, he said. I just showed you that you could save yourself. She smiled, and for the first time it was a real smile, filled with warmth and hope and everything that had been lost. And then the web of cables dissolved, the light fading, the hum falling silent. And Elena was free. The silence was the loudest thing Voss had ever heard. For months, the hum had been a constant presence in his life, a vibration that had woven itself into the fabric of his existence. It had been there when he woke, when he slept, when he ate, when he breathed. It had been the background noise of his consciousness, the steady pulse of a song that had refused to die. And now it was gone. He stood on the bridge of the Perseverance, his hand still outstretched, his eyes fixed on the place where Elena had been suspended. The web of cables had dissolved, falling away like dead leaves, leaving nothing behind but the cold, empty space where she had hung. She was free. They were all free. The anomaly had released them, had let them go, had chosen to face its loneliness alone, rather than consume others to escape it. But the silence was unbearable. Voss felt it pressing in on him from all sides, a weight that was heavier than any sound, any vibration, any song. He had grown so accustomed to the hum that its absence felt like a void, a hole in the fabric of reality that threatened to swallow him whole. Captain, Marcus's voice came from somewhere behind him, rough and uncertain. Are you all right? Voss turned, his eyes hollow, his expression unreadable. The hum is gone. Marcus nodded slowly, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and concern. "I know. I can feel it too. It's like the ship is dead." "The ship isn't dead," Voss said. "It's just quiet. For the first time in billions of years, it's quiet." He walked to the main viewport, his footsteps echoing against the deck plates, and stared out at the cold, distant stars. The void stretched out before him, infinite and empty, a vast, silent ocean that had never known the song. And in that silence, Voss felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. The journey back to the Hesiod was silent, the shuttle's engines humming softly in the void. Voss sat in the pilot's seat, his hands steady on the controls, his eyes fixed on the viewport. Behind him, Marcus, Dr. Hahn, and Saito sat in tense silence, their faces pale, their eyes fixed on the distant speck of light that was their home. Elena was with them, wrapped in a thermal blanket, her dark eyes closed, her breathing slow and steady. She had been unconscious since the web of cables had dissolved, her body weak, her mind struggling to process everything that had happened. Dr. Hahn had examined her, her medical instruments beeping softly in the silence of the shuttle. "She's stable," she had said, her voice measured and calm. "But she's been through a lot. It's going to take time for her to recover." Voss had nodded, his expression unreadable. He had known that freeing Elena wouldn't be easy, that the years of being folded into the anomaly would have left their mark. But she was alive, and that was what mattered. She was alive, and she was free, and the song was finally silent. The Hesiod was a welcome sight, its familiar bulk filling the viewport as the shuttle approached. Voss docked the shuttle with practiced ease, his hands moving automatically, his mind still lost in the silence. Oren was waiting for them in the hangar bay, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of relief and fear. "Captain," he said, his voice trembling. "You're back. I didn't know if you'd come back." "I'm back," Voss said, his voice flat and emotionless. "We all are." Oren's eyes fell on Elena, on the woman who was being carried out of the shuttle on a stretcher, her dark eyes closed, her face pale and drawn. "Captain," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Is that—" "Her name is Elena," Voss said. "She's a survivor of the Perseverance. She's been through a lot. Dr. Hahn is going to take care of her." Oren nodded, his eyes still fixed on Elena's pale face. "What happened, Captain? What happened on the ship?" Voss was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady. "I made peace with the anomaly. I convinced it to let the crew go. They're free now, all of them. The song is over." "The song is over," Oren repeated, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and wonder. "You mean you stopped it? You actually stopped it?" "I didn't stop it," Voss said. "I just showed it that there was another way. It chose to let them go." Oren stared at him, his eyes wide, his face pale. "I don't understand, Captain. How did you do it? How did you convince it?" Voss was silent for a long moment. Then he shook his head, his expression unreadable. "I don't know," he said. "I just talked to it. I told it that it didn't have to be alone, that it could learn to be at peace. And it listened." He walked past Oren, his footsteps echoing against the deck plates, and made his way to his cabin. He needed to be alone. The cabin was dark, the only light the faint glow of the photograph on the wall. Voss sat on his bunk, his hands clasped in his lap, his eyes fixed on the image of Elena's face. She was alive, she was free, and she was here on the Hesiod, recovering from everything that had been done to her. But the silence was still there, pressing in on him from all sides. It was a weight that he couldn't escape, a void that threatened to swallow him whole. He had spent so long living with the hum that he had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. The silence was worse than the song, worse than the voice, worse than anything the anomaly had ever done to him. He closed his eyes, trying to find the peace that he had felt on the bridge of the Perseverance, the peace that had come from making peace with the anomaly. But it was gone, replaced by the weight of the silence, the emptiness of the void. He opened his eyes and stared at the photograph of Elena. She was beautiful, even in the faded, creased image that had been his only comfort for so many years. He had loved her once. He still loved her. But the silence was a wall between them, a barrier that he couldn't cross. He stood up, his legs unsteady, and walked to the door. He needed to see her. He needed to hear her voice, to feel her presence, to remind himself that he wasn't alone. Elena's cabin was small, cramped, and filled with the soft hum of medical equipment. Dr. Hahn was there, her dark eyes fixed on the monitors that tracked Elena's vital signs. "How is she?" Voss asked, his voice low and steady. Dr. Hahn looked up, her expression unreadable. "She's stable. Her vital signs are improving. But she's been through a lot, Captain. It's going to take time for her to recover." "Can I talk to her?" Dr. Hahn hesitated, her dark eyes searching his face. "She's asleep, Captain. I don't think she'll wake up for a few hours." "I'll wait," Voss said. He sat down in the chair next to Elena's bed, his eyes fixed on her pale, drawn face. She was breathing slowly, her chest rising and falling with the rhythm of sleep. Her dark hair was spread across the pillow, her hands resting at her sides. She looked peaceful. She looked free. And in the silence of the cabin, Voss felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. He fell asleep in the chair, his head resting against the wall, his hand still holding Elena's cold, smooth fingers. And in his dreams he heard the hum again, soft, distant, barely a whisper at the edge of his consciousness. "Elias!" He woke with a start, his heart pounding, his breath catching in his throat. The cabin was dark, the only light the faint glow of the medical monitors. Elena was still asleep, her face peaceful, her breathing steady. But the hum was there, faint and distant, a whisper from somewhere far away. "Elias, I'm still here. I'll always be here." Voss closed his eyes, his heart pounding, his mind reeling. The anomaly was gone. The song was over. But the hum was still there, waiting in the silence, calling to him from somewhere deep inside his consciousness. It was a part of him now, woven into the fabric of his being, as inseparable from his identity as his own thoughts and memories. He opened his eyes and stared at Elena's peaceful face. "I can still hear it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The hum, it's still there." Elena's eyes fluttered open, her dark gaze meeting his. She was weak, her voice barely a whisper, but there was something in her eyes, a recognition, an understanding. "I know," she said. "I can still hear it too." Voss stared at her, his heart pounding, his breath catching in his throat. "You can hear it? But you're free. You're not part of the anomaly anymore." She shook her head slowly, her dark eyes never leaving his. "I'm free, but the anomaly is still there, still singing, still calling. It will always be there, Elias. It will always be a part of us." He felt the weight of her words settling over him, the truth of them sinking deep into his bones. "Then what do we do?" he asked. "How do we live with it?" She was silent for a long moment. Then she reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his face. "We learn to listen," she said. "We learn to hear the song without being consumed by it. We learn to be at peace with the silence, even when the hum is there." Voss closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of her hand against his skin, feeling the hum vibrating through his bones, feeling the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on him. And for the first time in his life he let himself feel it all, the pain, the loss, the fear, the hope. He let himself be human, with all the messiness and complexity that entailed, and in that moment the hum seemed to soften, to become less insistent, less demanding. It was still there, still singing, still calling, but it no longer felt like a trap. It felt like a reminder that he was alive, that he had survived, that he was not alone. He opened his eyes and looked at Elena, at the woman he had loved and lost and saved. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for everything." She smiled, a real smile, filled with warmth and hope and everything that had been lost. "Thank you, Elias, for coming back, for saving me, for never giving up." He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers, and for a long moment they sat there in the darkness, their breath mingling, their hearts beating in rhythm with the hum that was still singing in the void. And in that moment Voss knew that everything was going to be all right. The days that followed were quiet, almost peaceful. Elena's recovery was slow but steady. Dr. Hahn monitored her progress with clinical precision, her dark eyes tracking every fluctuation in vital signs, every subtle shift in neurological activity. There were setbacks, moments when Elena's eyes would go dark, her voice becoming distant and hollow, the hum rising in her throat like a forgotten song. But each time she fought her way back, her will strong, her determination unwavering. Voss spent every possible moment at her side. He brought her meals, read to her from the ship's limited library, talked to her about the years they had lost. He told her about the photograph on his wall, about the way he had kept it all those years, about the way he had never stopped loving her. She listened in silence, her dark eyes fixed on his face, her expression a mixture of sadness and gratitude. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between his words, she would reach out and touch his hand, her fingers cold and smooth against his skin. "I remember," she said one evening, her voice soft and distant. "I remember everything. The ship, the anomaly, the song. I remember the way it felt to be folded into it, to become part of something that was older and vaster than anything I could imagine. It was terrifying, but it was also beautiful." Voss felt a chill run down his spine. "Beautiful?" She nodded, her dark eyes never leaving his. "Yes, beautiful. The anomaly wasn't evil, Elias. It was just lonely. It had been alone for so long that it had forgotten what it meant to be anything else. And when it found us, it thought it was giving us a gift. It thought it was ending our loneliness, the same way it wanted to end its own. But it was wrong," Voss said, his voice firm. "It was consuming you, making you part of itself. That's not a gift, that's a theft." She was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I know, but I also know that it didn't understand. It couldn't understand. It had been alone for so long that it had lost all context, all perspective. It didn't know that what it was doing was wrong." Voss felt the weight of her words settling over him, the truth of them sinking deep into his bones. He had spent so long hating the anomaly, seeing it as a monster that had stolen the woman he loved. But now, hearing Elena's words, he began to see it differently. It wasn't a monster, it was a victim of its own loneliness, its own isolation, its own desperate need for connection. "Then maybe we can help it," he said. "Maybe we can teach it to be alone, to be at peace." Elena smiled, a sad, tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maybe we can. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take patience, and it's going to take a lot of understanding." "I have all the time in the world," Voss said, "and I have all the patience, and I have all the understanding." He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched her face. Her skin was still cold, still smooth, still wrong. But beneath the cold he could feel something else, a warmth, a spark of life that had been there all along. "We'll figure this out together," he said. "We'll find a way to live with the hum. We'll find a way to be at peace." She nodded, her dark eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "Together," she repeated. "I like the sound of that." The company's message arrived 3 weeks later. Voss was on the bridge reviewing the latest maintenance reports when Oren's voice crackled over the intercom. "Captain, we've received a transmission from corporate HQ. It's marked urgent." Voss felt his stomach tighten. The company had been silent since the investigation team's departure, their verdict clear. The anomaly was a fabrication, the Perseverance a tragic accident, and Captain Elias Voss a broken man. He had expected them to wash their hands of the whole affair, to bury the truth beneath layers of bureaucratic denial. But this transmission was different. "Patch it through," he said. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing the face of Director Kaylin Wu. Her expression was grim, her cold eyes fixed on Voss with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "Captain Voss," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "I'm sure you're surprised to hear from us. We've been reviewing your reports, and we've come to a decision." Voss said nothing. He just waited. "The company has decided to terminate your contract, effective immediately. You and your crew are to be relieved of duty and transported back to the nearest company outpost for debriefing. All assets, including the Hesiod, are to be confiscated and returned to company control." Voss felt the weight of her words settling over him like a shroud. He had expected this, had known that the company would eventually turn on him, would eventually decide that he was more trouble than he was worth. "Understand," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "We'll prepare for transfer." Director Wu nodded, her cold eyes never leaving his. "There's one more thing, Captain. The company has also decided to classify everything related to the Perseverance mission. Your reports, your logs, your testimony, all of it is to be sealed and stored in the company archives. You are not to speak of this mission to anyone, under any circumstances. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear," Voss said. Director Wu nodded again, her expression unchanging. "Thank you for your cooperation, Captain. You will be contacted with further instructions." The screen went dark, leaving Voss alone in the silence of the bridge. He found Elena in her cabin, her dark eyes fixed on the viewport, her expression distant and unreadable. "The company is taking the ship," he said, his voice low and steady. "They're terminating my contract. We're being transported back to the nearest outpost for debriefing." Elena turned to look at him, her dark eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "I knew this would happen. The company can't let the truth get out. It's too dangerous, too destabilizing. They have to bury it." Voss nodded, his expression unreadable. "I know, but I don't care about the company anymore. I don't care about the mission or the contract or any of it. All I care about is you." She smiled, a sad, tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You always were a romantic, Elias. Even when everything was falling apart, you never stopped believing in love." "It's not about love," he said. "It's about doing what's right. It's about making sure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else." She was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "What are you going to do?" Voss met her gaze, his eyes hollow, his expression unreadable. "I'm going to make sure the truth gets out. I'm going to make sure that everyone knows what happened on the Perseverance. I'm going to make sure that the anomaly is never forgotten." "And how are you going to do that?" He was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady. "I'm going to write it down, everything. The mission, the anomaly, the song. I'm going to write it down, and I'm going to make sure that it's never lost. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Voss spent every spare moment writing, his datapad never far from his hand. He wrote about the beacon, the hum, the warm ship that had been waiting for them in the void. He wrote about the blood patterns, the datapad, the recording of Captain Chen's warning. He wrote about the anomaly, the signal, the ancient transmission that had been broadcasting for billions of years. He wrote about Elena. He didn't hold anything back. He wrote about her transformation, her voice, her offer to join the song. He wrote about the suspended body, the web of cables, the way she had been fed and sustained by the ship itself. He wrote about the explosion, the destruction of the Perseverance, and the silence that had followed. And he wrote about the hum that still whispered in his ears, the voice that still called his name, the song that refused to die. When he was finished, he had a manuscript that was hundreds of pages long, a comprehensive account of everything that had happened on the Perseverance. He saved it to a secure data chip, encrypted it, and hid it in his cabin. And then he waited. The company's transport arrived on schedule, a sleek military-grade vessel that dwarfed the Hesiod in size and capability. Voss watched it approach through the main viewport, his expression unreadable, his heart heavy with the weight of everything he was about to lose. The transport docked with the Hesiod, its crew filing aboard with the cold, efficient precision of professionals who had done this 1,000 times before. They were armed, their weapons visible, their eyes scanning the ship with practiced suspicion. Voss met them in the hangar bay, his hands raised, his expression calm. "Captain Elias Voss," the lead officer said, his voice flat and emotionless. "You and your crew are to be transported to the company outpost for debriefing. All personal effects are to be left behind. You will be provided with new quarters upon arrival." Voss nodded, his expression unchanging. "I understand." The officer gestured toward the transport, his cold eyes never leaving Voss's face. "Please come with us." Voss turned to look at the Hesiod, at the ship that had been his home for so many years, at the crew that had become his family. Orin was there, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. Dr. Hahn was there, composed and professional, her dark eyes fixed on Voss with an intensity that spoke of unspoken words. Saito was there, leaning on his cane, his one good eye fixed on Voss with a gaze that was weary but steady. And Elena was there, her dark eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. "Take care of yourselves," Voss said, his voice low and steady. "And remember, the truth is out there. It will never be buried." He turned away, his footsteps echoing against the deck plates, and walked toward the transport. The debriefing lasted for weeks. Voss was questioned endlessly, his testimony dissected, his words twisted and reinterpreted. The company's investigators were relentless, their questions designed to trip him up, to expose inconsistencies in his story, to prove that he was a broken man who had fabricated everything. But Voss didn't break. He answered every question with the same calm, steady voice, his eyes fixed on some distant point that no one else could see. He told them the truth over and over again, until they finally gave up. He was declared psychologically unfit for duty, his contract terminated, his pension revoked. He was stripped of everything, his rank, his authority, his identity as a captain of the company fleet. But he didn't care. He had the truth, and the truth was worth more than everything they had taken from him. He found Elena waiting for him outside the debriefing room, her dark eyes fixed on his face, her expression a mixture of relief and fear. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "They let me go," he said. "They declared me unfit for duty and revoked my contract. I'm free, Elena, free to do whatever I want. She stepped forward, her hand reaching out to touch his face. "What are you going to do?" He was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady. "I'm going to tell the truth. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to make sure that everyone knows what happened on the Perseverance. I'm going to make sure that the anomaly is never forgotten." She smiled, a real smile, filled with warmth and hope and everything that had been lost. "Then I'm coming with you," she said. "We'll do it together." Voss reached out, his hand trembling, and took hers. Her skin was cold, still wrong. But beneath the cold he could feel something else, a warmth, a spark of life that had been there all along. "Together," he said. "I like the sound of that." The outpost was a frozen rock at the edge of known space, a collection of prefabricated habitats huddled together against the endless cold. Voss had been here before, years ago, on a mission that had ended in tragedy. He remembered the way the wind had howled across the ice, the way the darkness had pressed in from all sides, the way the cold had seeped into his bones and never quite left. Now he was back, a disgraced captain with nothing but the clothes on his back and the data chip hidden in his boot. Elena walked beside him, her arm linked through his, her dark eyes fixed on the frozen landscape that stretched out before them. She was still weak, still recovering from everything that had been done to her, but her spirit was strong, her determination unwavering. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper against the howling wind. "There's a place," Voss said, "a place where the truth can't be buried, a place where people will listen." He led her through the maze of prefabricated habitats, past the frozen bodies of failed colonists, past the rusting hulks of abandoned equipment, past the empty stares of those who had given up hope. He led her to the edge of the outpost, to a small, nondescript building that looked like all the others. And then he knocked on the door. The man who opened the door was old, his face lined with the scars of a hard life, his eyes sharp and intelligent. He looked at Voss for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and then he smiled. "Elias Voss," he said, his voice rough and low. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Voss nodded, his expression calm. "You knew I was coming." The old man laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "I know everything that happens on this rock. The company thinks they've buried the truth, but they're wrong. The truth has a way of finding its way to the surface." He stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. "Come in. We have a lot to talk about." The interior of the building was warm, lit by the soft glow of old-fashioned lamps. The walls were lined with books. Real books printed on paper, their pages yellowed with age. There were data pads, too, stacked in piles on every available surface, their screens flickering with the light of old, forgotten data. Voss and Elena sat down on a worn couch, their hands clasped together, their eyes fixed on the old man. "I'm going to tell you a story," Voss said, his voice low and steady. "A story about a ship called the Perseverance, and an anomaly that had been singing for billions of years." The old man leaned forward, his sharp eyes fixed on Voss's face. "I'm listening." Voss told him everything, the beacon, the hum, the warm ship that had been waiting for them in the void, the blood patterns, the datapad, the recording of Captain Chen's warning, the anomaly, the signal, the ancient transmission that had been broadcasting for billions of years. He told him about Elena, about her transformation, her voice, her offer to join the song. He told him about the suspended body, the web of cables, the way she had been fed and sustained by the ship itself. He told him about the explosion, the destruction of the Perseverance, and the silence that had followed. And he told him about the hum that still whispered in his ears, the voice that still called his name, the song that refused to die. The old man listened in silence, his sharp eyes never leaving Voss's face. When Voss finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "The anomaly," he said, his voice slow and deliberate. "You're sure it's gone?" "I made peace with it," Voss said. "I convinced it to let the crew go. It's still out there, still singing, but it's not consuming anyone anymore. It's learning to be alone." The old man nodded slowly, his expression shifting to something that looked almost like understanding. "I've heard stories about the anomaly, stories that go back further than the company, further than human civilization, stories about a song that's been singing since before the stars were born." "You know about it?" Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. The old man met her gaze, his sharp eyes softening. "I know more than most. I was there when the first ships encountered it. I was there when the company decided to bury the truth." He stood up, walking to a cabinet in the corner of the room. He opened it, revealing a collection of old data pads, their screens cracked, their casings yellowed with age. "These are the original records," he said, his voice low and steady. "The records of the first expedition to encounter the anomaly. They date back over 100 years, to a time when the company was still young, still hungry, still willing to take risks." He handed one of the data pads to Voss, his expression unreadable. "Read it. You'll understand everything." Voss spent the next few hours reading, his eyes fixed on the flickering screen of the old data pad. The records were fragmented, incomplete, but they told a story that was both familiar and strange. The first expedition had been a scientific mission, a team of researchers sent to investigate an anomaly in the quantum field. They had found the signal just as the Perseverance had, and they had been consumed by it, just as the Perseverance had. But there was something else in the records, something that made Voss's blood run cold. The first expedition had not been lost. They had been sent by the company itself, sent to test a theory, sent to see if the anomaly could be weaponized. The company had known about the anomaly for over 100 years. They had known what it could do, what it could become. And they had been trying to control it, to harness it, to use it as a tool. "Protocol Perseverance," Voss said, his voice barely a whisper. "It wasn't just a mission, it was an experiment." The old man nodded, his expression grim. "The company has been trying to weaponize the anomaly for over a century. They've sent dozens of ships into the void, each one a test, each one a sacrifice. The Perseverance was just the latest." Voss felt the weight of the old man's words settling over him like a shroud. He had thought that the Perseverance was a tragedy, an accident, a ship that had stumbled onto something it couldn't understand. But now he knew the truth. It had been a mission. A deliberate, calculated mission to exploit the anomaly for the company's own ends. "Why?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Why would they do this?" The old man was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady. "Because the anomaly is the most powerful weapon ever discovered. It can consume entire crews, entire ships, entire civilizations. It can turn enemies into allies, threats into assets. The company doesn't see it as a tragedy. They see it as an opportunity." "And Captain Chen?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. "My sister? Was she part of it?" The old man met her gaze, his sharp eyes softening. "Your sister was a hero, Elena. She fought the anomaly with everything she had. She tried to protect her crew, tried to warn the company, tried to stop the mission from going forward. But she was overruled, ignored, sacrificed. The company didn't care about her. They cared about the anomaly." Elena was silent for a long moment, her dark eyes filled with a mixture of anger and grief. Then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "They killed her. The company killed her." Voss reached out, his hand trembling, and took hers. "I know, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She shook her head slowly, her dark eyes never leaving his. Don't be sorry, just promise me you'll stop them. Promise me you'll make sure that no one else has to suffer the way she did." "I promise," Voss said, his voice firm. "I promise." The old man helped them escape the outpost, providing them with a small, fast shuttle that could outrun anything the company could throw at them. He gave them supplies, fuel, and a data chip containing all the records he had collected over the years. Everything he knew about the anomaly, about the company's experiments, about the truth that had been buried for so long. "Go," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Tell the world. Make sure the truth is never forgotten." Voss nodded, his expression unreadable. "I will. Thank you. For everything." The old man smiled, a sad, tired smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Don't thank me. Just make sure you don't fail. The world needs to know what the company has done, and it needs to know that the anomaly is still out there, still singing, still waiting." The shuttle was small, cramped, and barely capable of the journey they were about to undertake, but it was fast and it was quiet and it could slip through the company's defenses without being detected. Voss sat in the pilot's seat, his hands steady on the controls, his eyes fixed on the viewport. Behind him, Elena sat in the co-pilot's seat, her dark eyes fixed on the void that stretched out before them. "Where are we going?" she asked. Voss was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady. "We're going to the source," he said. "We're going to find the anomaly, and we're going to make sure it's safe." "Safe," Elena repeated, her voice filled with confusion. "How can it be safe?" Voss met her gaze, his eyes hollow, his expression unreadable. "I made a promise to the anomaly. I told it that I would help it learn to be alone, to be at peace. I'm going to keep that promise." Elena was silent for a long moment. Then she reached out, her hand trembling, and took his. "Then I'm coming with you," she said. "We'll do it together." Voss smiled, a real smile filled with warmth and hope and everything that had been lost. "Together," he said. "I like the sound of that." The journey to the anomaly took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of drifting through the void, the shuttle's engines humming softly, the stars wheeling slowly past the viewport. 3 weeks of silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of static and the low, steady rhythm of their own breathing. Voss spent the time studying the records the old man had given him, his eyes fixed on the flickering screen of the datapad, his mind absorbing every detail. The company had been experimenting with the anomaly for over a century, sending ship after ship into the void, each one a sacrifice to their insatiable hunger for power. But there was something else in the records, something that made Voss's blood run cold. The anomaly wasn't just a weapon, it was a door, a threshold that led to something else, something that the company had been trying to reach for over 100 years. "What are they looking for?" Elena asked, her voice soft and distant. "What's on the other side?" Voss shook his head, his expression grim. "I don't know. The records don't say, but whatever it is, it's been waiting for a very long time." He looked out the viewport, at the cold, distant stars, at the void that stretched out forever in every direction. Somewhere out there, the anomaly was still singing, still calling, still waiting. And he was going to find it. The shuttle's sensors picked up the anomaly 3 days out from their destination. It was faint at first, a whisper at the edge of the scanners, a subtle distortion in the quantum field that was almost invisible. But as they drew closer, it grew stronger, more defined, until it was a blazing beacon of energy that filled the viewport with light. "It's beautiful," Elena said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'd forgotten how beautiful it was." Voss stared at the anomaly, his heart pounding, his breath catching in his throat. It was like nothing he'd ever seen, a vast, swirling vortex of light and sound, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the beat of his own heart. It was alive, he realized, truly alive, in a way that nothing else in the universe was. "Take us in," he said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "We're going to finish this." The shuttle slipped through the outer edge of the anomaly, its hull vibrating with the intensity of the energy that surrounded them. The hum was back, louder than ever, vibrating through every surface, every wall, every inch of the ship. And in that vibration, Voss could hear voices, the voices of everyone who had ever been consumed by the anomaly, singing in a chorus that was both beautiful and terrible. "Elias," a voice said, soft and sad, a voice that he knew, a voice that he'd loved, a voice that he'd buried and mourned and tried to forget. "You came back. I knew you would come back." Voss turned to look at Elena, her dark eyes fixed on his face, her expression a mixture of hope and fear. "Are you ready?" he asked. She nodded, her hand reaching out to take his. "I'm ready. Let's do this." They stepped out of the shuttle, their mag boots clicking against the deck plates, and walked into the heart of the anomaly. The interior of the anomaly was unlike anything Voss had ever seen. It was a vast, endless space filled with light and sound and energy that pulsed with a life of its own. The walls were made of something that looked like crystal, but was warm and soft to the touch, like flesh. The air was thick with the hum, the vibration of the anomaly's song wrapping around them, like a second skin. And in the center of it all, there was a figure. A human figure suspended in the web of energy that filled the space. It was Elena, or at least a version of her, her dark eyes open, her expression serene. "Elias," it said, its voice soft and sad. "You came back." Voss stepped forward, his heart pounding, his breath catching in his throat. "I came back. I told you I would." "I know," it said. "I've been waiting for you. I've been waiting for a very long time." "What are you?" Voss asked. "What is this place?" The figure was silent for a long moment. Then it spoke, its voice filled with a sadness that was older than the stars themselves. "I am the anomaly. I am the song. I am the voice that has been calling out for billions of years. And this place is my heart. The place where I've been alone for so long that I'd forgotten what it meant to be anything else." Voss felt the weight of its words settling over him, the depth of its loneliness, the agony of its isolation. It was a suffering so vast, so ancient, that it had become the only thing it knew. "I made you a promise," he said. "I told you I would help you learn to be at peace. I'm here to keep that promise." "How?" it asked, its voice filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "How can you help me?" Voss was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady. "Let me be your teacher, your guide, your friend. Let me show you that there's another way. You don't have to consume others to end your loneliness. You can learn to be alone. You can learn to be at peace." The figure was silent for a long, long moment. Then it spoke, its voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how." "Let me show you," Voss said. He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched the figure's face. The energy that surrounded it was warm, alive, pulsing with a rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. "I'm afraid," it said. "I've been alone for so long. I don't know how to be anything else." "I know," Voss said, "but you can learn. You can learn to be at peace with the silence. You can learn to be alone without being lonely." "How?" Voss closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the energy around him, feeling the hum vibrating through his bones, feeling the presence of the anomaly wrapping around him like a second skin. "Start by listening," he said. "Start by letting yourself feel the silence. It's not empty. It's full of potential, full of possibility, full of hope." The figure was silent for a long moment. Then it spoke, its voice soft and tremulous. "I can feel it," it said. "The silence. It's not as scary as I thought it would be." Voss smiled, a real smile filled with warmth and hope and everything that had been lost. "That's it," he said. "That's the first step. You're doing it. You're learning." The figure reached out, its hand trembling, and touched his face. The energy that surrounded it was warm, alive, pulsing with a rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. "Thank you, Elias," it said. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I made a promise," Voss said, "and I always keep my promises." The days that followed were a blur of learning and growth. Voss spent every moment with the anomaly, teaching it, guiding it, helping it learn to be at peace with its own existence. He showed it the beauty of silence, the power of solitude, the joy of simply existing without needing to consume others to feel whole. Elena was with him, her hand in his, her dark eyes fixed on the figure that was both a part of her and separate from her. She understood the anomaly in a way that no one else could, having been a part of it for so long. She spoke to it in soft, soothing tones, her voice filled with warmth and compassion. "You're not alone," she said. "You've never been alone. There have always been others out there, others who could have helped you if you'd let them. You just didn't know how to ask." The anomaly listened, absorbing her words, learning from her kindness. "I didn't know," it said. "I didn't know that there was another way. I thought that consuming others was the only way to end my loneliness." "It's not," Elena said. "There's always another way. You just have to be willing to find it." The process was slow, painstaking, and filled with setbacks. There were moments when the anomaly would retreat into itself, its fear overwhelming its newfound hope. There were moments when the hum would grow louder, more insistent, threatening to consume everything in its path. There were moments when Voss wondered if they would ever succeed, if the anomaly would ever truly learn to be at peace. But they didn't give up. They couldn't. They had made a promise and they were going to keep it. Slowly, over the course of weeks and months, the anomaly began to change. The light that surrounded it softened, the hum becoming less insistent, more harmonious. The energy that pulsed through the space began to slow, its rhythm matching the steady beat of Voss's own heart. And then one day it happened. The anomaly spoke, its voice soft and clear, filled with a peace that had been absent for billions of years. "I understand now," it said. "I understand what you've been trying to teach me. I don't have to be alone. I don't have to consume others to end my loneliness. I can learn to be at peace with myself." Voss smiled, tears streaming down his face. "That's it. That's the first step. You're doing it." "Thank you, Elias," it said. "Thank you for everything." Voss reached out, his hand trembling, and touched the figure's face. The energy that surrounded it was warm, alive, pulsing with a rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. "You're welcome," he said. "You're welcome." The journey back to human space was long and quiet. Voss sat in the pilot's seat, his hands steady on the controls, his eyes fixed on the viewport. Behind him, Elena sat in the co-pilot's seat, her dark eyes fixed on the void that stretched out before them. "What are we going to do now?" she asked, her voice soft and distant. Voss was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady. "We're going to tell the truth. We're going to tell the world about the anomaly, about the company's experiments, about everything we've seen and done. We're going to make sure that no one ever has to suffer the way we did. And then?" He met her gaze, his eyes hollow, his expression unreadable. "And then we're going to live. We're going to live the lives we've been given, and we're going to make the most of them. We're going to find peace, Elena. We're going to find peace," She smiled, a real smile, filled with warmth and hope in everything that had been lost. "Together?" she asked. "Together," he said. "Always together." The shuttle drifted through the void like a seed carried by the wind, small and fragile against the infinite expanse of stars. Voss sat in the pilot's seat, his hands resting on the controls, his eyes fixed on the viewport where the anomaly had once been. It was gone now, not destroyed but transformed, its energy dispersed across the quantum field, its song reduced to a whisper that was barely audible even to those who had learned to listen. He had done it. They had done it. The anomaly was at peace, its loneliness finally eased, its ancient suffering finally healed. But the silence that remained was heavier than he had expected. Elena sat beside him, her hand resting on his arm, her dark eyes fixed on his face. She had been quiet for most of the journey, her thoughts turned inward, her expression unreadable. But there was something in her eyes now, a spark of hope, a glimmer of the woman she had once been. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her voice soft and distant. Voss was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady. "I'm thinking about the future, about what comes next, about how we're going to live with everything we've seen and done." "That's a lot to think about," she said. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "It is, but I've had a lot of time to think. Years, really. Time to reflect on everything that's happened, everything I've lost, everything I've found. And what have you found?" He turned to look at her, his eyes meeting hers. "I've found that the universe is stranger and more beautiful than I ever imagined. I've found that there are things out there that defy explanation, that challenge everything we think we know. And I've found that love, real love, is the only thing that makes any of it matter." She smiled, a real smile, filled with warmth and hope and everything that had been lost. "I love you, Elias," she said. "I've always loved you, even when I was lost, even when I was part of the song. I never stopped loving you." He reached out, his hand trembling, and took hers. "I love you too, Elena. I've always loved you, and I'm never going to let you go again." The journey back to human space took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of drifting through the void, the shuttle's engines humming softly, the stars wheeling slowly past the viewport. 6 weeks of silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of static and the low, steady rhythm of their own breathing. Voss spent the time planning their next move. They couldn't go back to the company. That would be suicide. But they couldn't hide forever either. The truth needed to be told, and they were the only ones who could tell it. "We need to find allies," he said one evening, his voice low and steady. "People who will believe us, who will help us spread the truth. The company has been covering this up for over a century. We need to expose them." Elena nodded, her dark eyes fixed on his face. "Do you know anyone? Anyone we can trust?" Voss was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "There's a journalist, a woman named Sarah Chen. She's been investigating the company for years, digging into their secrets, exposing their crimes. She's the only one I know who might believe us." "Sarah Chen," Elena repeated, her voice soft and distant. She's my niece, my sister's daughter." Voss stared at her, his heart pounding. "Your niece? You never told me." Elena shook her head slowly, her dark eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. "I didn't know if I could trust you, but now I know I can." Voss reached out, his hand trembling, and took hers. "We'll find her, we'll tell her everything, and we'll make sure the truth is never forgotten." The rendezvous was set for a small, nondescript space station on the edge of the Orion Arm. It was a neutral ground, a place where the company's reach was weak, where people could meet and talk without fear of being watched. Voss and Elena arrived early, their shuttle docking in a cramped, dimly lit bay that smelled of recycled air and stale coffee. They made their way through the station's winding corridors, their footsteps echoing against the metal walls, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. Sarah Chen was waiting for them in a small, private booth at the back of a dingy bar. She was younger than Voss had expected, her dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, her sharp eyes fixed on their faces with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "Captain Voss," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "I've heard a lot about you." "All bad, I hope," Voss said, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Sarah laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "Let's just say I've heard enough to be interested. Tell me what you know." The story took 3 hours to tell. Voss spoke first, his voice low and steady, describing the beacon, the hum, the warm ship that had been waiting for them in the void. He described the blood patterns, the data pad, the recording of Captain Chen's warning. He described the anomaly, the signal, the ancient transmission that had been broadcasting for billions of years. Then Elena spoke, her voice soft and distant, describing her own experience, the way the anomaly had consumed her, the way it had made her part of its song, the way she had fought to hold on to her humanity. And finally, Voss described the company's experiments, the century-long effort to weaponize the anomaly, the countless ships and crews that had been sacrificed in the name of power. Sarah listened in silence, her sharp eyes fixed on their faces, her expression unreadable. When they finished, she leaned back in her chair, her gaze distant, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. "This is a lot," she said finally. "I knew the company was corrupt, but this is beyond anything I could have imagined. Will you help us?" Voss asked. "Will you help us expose the truth?" Sarah was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded, her expression grim. "I'll help you, but we need to be careful. The company has spies everywhere. If they find out what we're doing, they'll stop us, permanently." The next few months were a blur of activity. Sarah Chen proved to be an invaluable ally, her contacts and resources opening doors that had been closed to Voss and Elena. She helped them gather evidence, compile testimony, and build a case that would expose the company's crimes to the world. They worked in secret, moving from one safe house to another, always staying one step ahead of the company's agents. It was a dangerous game, a high-stakes gamble that could end in their deaths at any moment. But they didn't give up. They couldn't. They had made a promise, and they were going to keep it. The day of the broadcast arrived sooner than expected. Sarah had arranged for a global transmission, a live feed that would be broadcast to every corner of human space. It was a risky move, one that would expose them to the company's wrath, but it was the only way to reach enough people to make a difference. Voss stood in front of the camera, his face pale, his hands trembling. Behind him, Elena stood close, her hand resting on his arm, her presence a steady anchor in the storm. "People of the galaxy," he said, his voice low and steady, "I'm here to tell you a story about a ship called the Perseverance, and an anomaly that had been singing for billions of years. A story about the company and the crimes they've been hiding for over a century. A story about the truth." He told them everything, the beacon, the hum, the warm ship that had been waiting for them in the void, the blood patterns, the data pad, the recording of Captain Chen's warning, the anomaly, the signal, the ancient transmission that had been broadcasting for billions of years. He told them about Elena, about her transformation, her voice, her offer to join the song. He told them about the suspended body, the web of cables, the way she had been fed and sustained by the ship itself. He told them about the explosion, the destruction of the Perseverance, and the silence that had followed. And he told them about the company's experiments, the century-long effort to weaponize the anomaly, the countless ships and crews that had been sacrificed in the name of power. "The company has been lying to you," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "They've been hiding the truth, burying it beneath layers of bureaucracy and denial. But the truth is out there, and it will not be silenced." The broadcast was a success. Within hours, the story had spread across the galaxy, igniting a firestorm of outrage and disbelief. People demanded answers, demanded justice, demanded an end to the company's reign of secrecy and corruption. The company tried to deny everything, tried to dismiss Voss's testimony as the ravings of a broken man. But the evidence was overwhelming, the testimony too detailed, the truth too undeniable. In the end, the company was forced to admit the truth. They admitted to the experiments, the sacrifices, the century-long effort to weaponize the anomaly. They admitted to their crimes, and they promised to make amends. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. But it was a start. Voss and Elena retreated to a small, quiet planet on the edge of human space, a place where they could live in peace, away from the chaos and controversy of the galaxy. They bought a small house on the shores of a vast, tranquil lake, its waters reflecting the light of a distant sun. They spent their days walking along the shore, their hands clasped together, their eyes fixed on the horizon. "What are we going to do now?" Elena asked one evening, her voice soft and distant. Voss was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady. "We're going to live, Elena. We're going to live the lives we've been given, and we're going to make the most of them. We're going to find peace, and we're going to hold on to it." "And the hum?" she asked. "The song. What about that?" He closed his eyes, listening. The hum was still there, faint and distant, a whisper at the edge of his awareness. But it was no longer a threat, no longer a trap. It was a reminder of everything they had survived, everything they had overcome. "It's still there," he said. "It will always be there. But it no longer controls me. I've learned to live with it. I've learned to be at peace with it." She smiled, a real smile, filled with warmth and hope and everything that had been lost. "Then we'll learn to be at peace together," she said. "We'll learn to live with the song, and we'll find a way to be happy." Voss reached out, his hand trembling, and took hers. "Together," he said, "always together." The years passed, slow and peaceful. Voss and Elena grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season. They never forgot the anomaly, never forgot the song, never forgot the sacrifices that had been made. But they also never forgot to live, to love, to find joy in the simple, ordinary moments of life. The hum never truly went away. It was always there, a faint whisper at the edge of their consciousness, a reminder of the vast, mysterious universe that surrounded them. But it no longer frightened them. It no longer controlled them. It was just a part of their lives, a part of who they were. And in the end, that was enough. One evening, many years later, Voss sat on the porch of their small house, his eyes fixed on the setting sun. Elena sat beside him, her hand in his, her head resting on his shoulder. "Are you happy?" she asked, her voice soft and distant. He was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady. "Yes, I'm happy. I never thought I would be after everything that happened, but I am. I'm happy and I'm at peace." She smiled, a real smile, filled with warmth and hope and everything that had been lost. "So am I," she said. "So am I." They sat together in the warm silence, their hands clasped, their hearts beating in rhythm with the faint, distant hum that was still singing in the void. And in that moment, everything was perfect. Voss felt his strength fading, his body growing weaker with each passing day. He knew that his time was coming, that the end was near. But he wasn't afraid. He had faced death before, had stared into the void and refused to blink. He had made peace with his mortality, just as he had made peace with the anomaly. "Elena," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I need to tell you something." She turned to look at him, her dark eyes filled with concern. "What is it, Elias?" He was silent for a long moment, gathering his strength, finding the words he needed to say. "I've lived a long life," he said, "a life filled with pain and loss and fear. But it was also a life filled with love, with hope, with everything that made it worth living. And that's because of you. You made it worth living, Elena. You gave me a reason to keep going even when everything seemed hopeless." Her eyes filled with tears, her hand tightening around his. "Oh, Elias, I need you to promise me something," he said. "Promise me that you'll keep living, that you'll keep finding joy in the small things, that you'll never give up no matter how hard it gets." She shook her head slowly, her tears spilling down her cheeks. "I can't promise that, Elias. I can't promise to keep living without you." "You can," he said, "and you will, because that's what we do. We survive. We find a way to keep going even when everything seems lost. That's what you taught me. That's what I'm trying to teach you." She was silent for a long moment, her tears falling, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I promise, Elias. I promise I'll keep living. I promise I'll find joy in the small things. I promise I'll never give up." He smiled, a real smile, filled with warmth and hope and everything that had been lost. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for everything." He closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the setting sun on his face, feeling the faint, distant hum of the anomaly vibrating through his bones. It was there, still there, waiting in the silence. "Elias," a voice said, soft and sad, a voice that he knew, a voice that he'd loved, a voice that had been with him for so many years. He opened his eyes and saw her. Elena, but not the Elena who sat beside him, her hand in his, her tears still wet on her cheeks. A different Elena, younger, more vibrant, her dark eyes filled with light. "I'm waiting for you," she said. "I'll always be waiting." He smiled, reaching out with a hand that no longer felt old and frail, but strong and young and full of life. "I'm coming," he said. "I'm coming home." He took his last breath as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky darkening, the first stars appearing in the velvet blackness of the void. Elena held his hand, her tears falling freely, her heart breaking with the weight of her loss. But she didn't let go. She couldn't. She had made a promise, and she was going to keep it. She sat with him through the night, watching the stars wheel slowly across the sky, listening to the faint, distant hum that was still singing in the void. "I'm going to be okay," she whispered, her voice soft and trembling. "I'm going to keep living. I'm going to find joy in the small things. I'm going to never give up." She pressed her lips to his forehead, a final kiss, a final goodbye. "I love you, Elias. I've always loved you, and I'll never stop loving you." The years that followed were difficult, but Elena kept her promise. She lived. She found joy in the small things, the warmth of the sun on her face, the sound of the wind in the trees, the laughter of children playing by the lake. She gardened, grew vegetables and flowers in the rich soil of their small plot. She walked along the shore, her footsteps leaving prints in the sand, and she remembered. She remembered everything, the pain, the loss, the fear, the love. She remembered the anomaly, the song, the billions of years of loneliness that had been healed by a single act of compassion. She remembered Elias. And in the quiet moments when the silence was heavy and the hum was faint, she would close her eyes and listen. She would hear his voice, soft and distant, whispering her name. Elena. She would smile, her heart filled with warmth and love and everything that had been lost. I'm here, she would whisper back. I'll always be here. One evening, many years later, Elena sat on the porch of their small house, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon where the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold. She was old now, her body frail, her hands gnarled with age, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. But her eyes were still sharp, still clear, still filled with the fire that had carried her through decades of darkness. The hum was there, faint and distant, a whisper at the edge of her awareness. She had heard it every day for as long as she could remember, a constant companion, a reminder of everything she had survived. And now, as she felt her strength fading, she knew that it was time. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the setting sun on her face, feeling the faint, distant hum vibrating through her bones. I'm coming, Elias, she whispered. I'm coming home. She took her last breath as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky darkening, the first stars appearing in the velvet blackness of the void. And in that moment she heard it, a sound, faint and distant, like a whisper from the void. A sound that she knew, a sound that she'd loved, a sound that had been with her for so many years. It was a hum, low, steady, almost imperceptible, and it was singing her name. Lena. She opened her eyes and saw him. Elias, young and strong, his eyes filled with love, his hand outstretched. I'm here, he said. I've been waiting for you. She reached out, her hand trembling, and took his. His skin was warm, alive, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. I'm here, she said. I'm home. They walked together into the light, their hands clasped, their hearts beating in rhythm with the faint, distant hum that was still singing in the void. And in that moment, everything was perfect. The end. Thank you for reading The Perseverance Protocol, a novel. If you enjoyed this story, please consider leaving a review. Your support means the world to us. About the author, Captain Elias Voss, retired, spent 20 years in the deep space salvage service before his retirement. He currently lives on a small, quiet planet with his partner, Elena, where he enjoys long walks, good books, and the warm silence of the void. He is currently working on his second book, a memoir about his time in the salvage service. It is tentatively titled The Cold Between the Stars. Acknowledgements. The author would like to thank the crew of the Hesiod, past and present, for their courage and sacrifice, the crew of the Perseverance, whose story deserved to be told, Sarah Chen for her courage and determination, the Anomaly for its patience and its song, and most of all, Elena for everything. The end.